Chapter 218. Lu Tao's guess was certain. Because Lu Feng's bloodline was the same as his. He was also a human. However, when his martial path incarnation appeared, it had a threefold increase in strength. If there was anything different, it would be the mysterious Tongtian Futu in Lu Feng's mind space. Lu Feng did not say anything. His thoughts were the same as Lu Tao's. In this case, Xiaofeng, your martial path incarnation may not be as simple as it seems on the surface. Although it is a 7th grade martial path incarnation, its limit is definitely not just at 7th grade. Lu Feng frowned. He did not know what his father meant. Similarly, Yan Chunwei was the same. Seeing this scene, Lu Tao smiled slightly but did not make any assumptions. He said, since ancient times, martial path incarnations have been similar. However, Xiaofeng is different. The Tongtian Futu in his body is extremely mysterious. It even has the Great Devil True Body and the Primordial Scripture, 2 supreme techniques that are comparable to the Three Kings Codex. In the 2nd level, it even contains a great power of law. Then, the martial path incarnation that uses the complete Tongtian Futu as the blueprint will definitely not follow the normal rules. Xiaofeng's martial path incarnation, this Tongtian Futu, should be, it can grow. It can grow? The moment they heard these words, both Yan Chunwei and Lu Feng were stunned. Martial path incarnation could grow? With its grade, there was still the possibility of growth? This was simply unheard of. Don't look at me strangely. After all, Xiaofeng's situation has never happened before. Moreover, his martial path incarnation was born with a threefold increase in strength. In this case, it is not impossible. Of course, this is only my guess. Everything could only be known after Xiaofeng's level increased and he reached the limit of Tongtian Futu's martial art incarnation. So what we need to do is to wait for Xiaofeng's level to rise. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded gently. He could feel the terrifying power contained within this martial path incarnation. This was definitely not something a grade 7 martial path avatar could possess. Therefore, he chose to believe his father's words. Since the question had been answered, there were naturally no more problems. Lu Tao retrieved the square-shaped metal object and handed it over to Lu Feng. He looked at the sky outside, his eyes flashing with an indescribable feeling. Xiaofeng, it's still early. Are you going to enter the massacre abyss? Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. However, he quickly reacted. He knew that the massacre abyss that Lu Tao was talking about was not the massacre abyss that was used to test the son of massacre in the periphery. It should be the real massacre abyss that the old ancestor of the Lu family had told him. Xiaofeng, I have also entered the massacre abyss before. Inside, it is indeed, as outsiders say, full of endless suffering. However, you have the Great Devil True Body, so it is the most suitable place for you to cultivate. I think that in a few days you should be able to become a peak martial artist. For you, the massacre abyss is an absolute treasure land. Lu Feng nodded gently. When Tu Tianxin brought him here, he probably had the idea of going to the massacre abyss. Otherwise, he would not have insisted that he obtain the title of the massacre emperor. Then father, what is in the massacre abyss? Lu Feng was also very curious about the inside. Coincidentally, Lu Tao was beside him, so Lu Feng could ask. However, when he heard Lu Feng's question, Lu Tao shook his head slightly. Before he spoke, Yan Chunwei beside him spoke first. Xiaofeng, it's not that your father doesn't want to tell you, but the situation inside, no one can explain it clearly. The center of the massacre abyss, which is the real massacre abyss, is actually an inner world. It was formed by an inner world of an unknown existence. Inside, it can be said that there is everything, but it can also be said that there is nothing. Inside, you will experience a lot of hardships to test your willpower, but no one can say clearly what kind of hardships it is. Because different people had different experiences, the tribulations that appeared were also different. So, what is inside you will have to enter personally to know. Lu Feng nodded gently. Then father, let's go now. I have already obtained the title of the Massacre Emperor, so I think I can enter smoothly. Lu Tao smiled and nodded. He stood up directly and led Yen Chenwei and Lu Feng towards the Massacre Star. Lu Feng's main purpose of this trip was to become a warrior. After all, only by becoming a warrior could he have more time in the time realm. That way, he could successfully become a high-level psychic and pass the assessment. However, now that the Massacre Abyss could save him a lot of time and allow him to become a peak warrior as soon as possible, Lu Feng naturally did not want to let it go. After all, there was still a month before the assessment. This period of time was enough. If Lu Feng were to take a flying ship to the AI Star of Slaughter, it would take at least a day. After all, it was impossible to perform a space jump at such a distance. However, with a godly existence like Lu Tao accompanying him, he naturally did not need that much time. In just a few moments, the three of them had already appeared on Iwa's Massacre Star. Little Feng, Aiwa's Star of Slaughter is the largest star of slaughter, and the examination for the past King of Slaughter is held here. This is not only the core star of the Massacre Abyss, but it is also the entrance to the Massacre Abyss. The entrance to the inner world that I told you about is here. Lu Feng nodded gently. He followed closely behind Lu Tao and listened to Lu Tao's narration of the events that had transpired in the past. Soon, the family of three arrived in front of an ancient hall. Old, desolate, mottled. It was undoubtedly very strange for such a hall to appear on this planet that was filled with the aura of technology. However, the surrounding powerhouses did not feel anything strange about this. Those who were able to come here all knew the secret of the Massacre Abyss. They naturally understood the significance of this ancient hall. Xiaofeng, this is the Massacre Palace. I don't know what material this ancient hall is made of. Legend has it that this hall should have gone through several great calamities of the universe but was not destroyed. Not to mention anything else, just the existence of this hall is already considered a miracle in the universe. Lu Feng walked around the hall with interest. He reached out his arm to touch it, and Lu Tao did not stop him. Upon seeing this, Lu Feng knew that there should be no problem. He reached out his arm and gently touched the stone-like wall. At this moment, Lu Feng felt a slight chill in his palm. In addition, the ancient and desolate aura became even more intense. After a while, Lu Feng exhaled deeply and slowly retracted his arm. Father, let's go in. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with unwavering determination. Tribulations might be incomparably terrifying to others. However, they were nothing to Lu Feng. Although he had only been on the path of cultivation for less than a year, he had experienced a lot of pain during this period. Back then, he had only been a mid-level warrior, yet he had actually dared to face a martialist directly. He had even used his unparalleled willpower to erupt with earth-shaking power and obliterate a martialist who was many times stronger than him. Later on the Gufang Star, Lu Feng had once again surpassed himself. He had even dared to resist the will of the Divine King. The illusions of his 9 lives had made him experience too much. Every time, he had been able to find his way out of endless confusion. What was there to be afraid of with such willpower? Therefore, Lu Feng was not afraid. He was not afraid of anything. Finally, as he watched the Massacre Palace, Lu Feng took a step forward and stepped into it. Do you think he will succeed? Within the endless void, 2 figures stood there silently. There was nothing in front of them, but everything seemed to be presented in front of them. This was no longer something that could be explained or described by magical powers. This kind of power had already surpassed magical powers. It was a kind of destiny, a kind of surrender of the universe. Very few people had seen the faces of these 2 supreme existences. Even if they had seen them, they would instantly forget them. This was because they had the qualifications to do so. Unless one was a king or a supreme existence, they did not even have the qualifications to remember them. Lu Feng recognized one of these two existences. This was because he had spent 2 whole months with this existence's incarnation. With his help, Lu Feng had polished himself and sharpened his will. It was also because of these 2 months of help that he had the qualifications to become a martialist and the king of massacre. He was Tu Tianxin. This was the true body of Tu Tianxin. He heard the clear voice of the man beside him, yet he could no longer recall his face after a glance. Tu Tianxin's eyes shone with a resplendent brilliance. Luangu, Lu Feng is someone I have my eyes on. In fact, I am looking forward to him. Perhaps you will doubt me. However, once you have spent more time with him, you will know how terrifying he is and how unparalleled he is. His will can no longer be described as heaven-defying. For him, for a dream, for a goal, he can give up everything. As long as he has something in his eyes, the entire universe will have to give in to him. At this moment, Luangu was silent. His calm eyes shone with a strange brilliance. I did not expect this. You have such a high opinion of him. I remember that back then we had commented on those divine king powerhouses, those otherworldly supremes. However, there are only a few divine king that can make you say that they are good. There is only one person who can make you admire them so much. Only the primogenitor human king. Could it be that in your eyes, this Lu Feng is actually another primogenitor human king? I can feel it. The density of his bloodline is indeed unimaginable. It is very likely that it is the bloodline of the Lu family that is closest to the human king since ancient times. However, even if it is close, he is still not the most complete human king. He will never be able to surpass the human king. However, why do you still give him such an evaluation? Chapter 219. Luangu didn't understand. He was silent. However, upon hearing those words, Tu Tianxin started laughing. It was a crazy laughter. Human king? The human king is indeed terrifying. He was invincible for an entire era. He could even be called the most terrifying overlord of an era outside of the immortal devil era. But the human king is the human king, and Lu Feng is Lu Feng. Don't always talk about the human king. Don't compare Lu Feng with the human king. Lu Feng is Lu Feng. In my heart, there will be a day when future generations will use this sentence to evaluate the human king. In the era when the human king was invincible, he could almost be compared to Emperor Lu Feng. At this moment, Luangu was slightly stunned. Then, he took a deep breath. At his level, there was nothing in the entire universe that could shock him. But now, hearing Tu Tianxin's words, Luangu was really shocked. If future generations talked about the human king, they would describe him as Lu Feng. Just how terrifying was this? Do you really think that Lu Feng will have such a day? The crazy laughter stopped. At this moment, Tu Tianxin's eyes were shining. He pondered for a moment, then said slowly, "When we first met, Lu Feng was just an ordinary warrior. Or maybe after he unleashed all his power and used his supreme technique, he could barely reach the level of a monster. And the second time we met was 2 months later. Do you know what kind of attitude Lu Feng had when you met him for the second time?" Luangu smiled but didn't answer. He knew that Tu Tianxin was only asking him to follow his ideas. But who was he? How could he follow other people's ideas? Even if it was an existence of the same level, he couldn't. Seeing that Luangu didn't answer, Tu Tianxin didn't get angry. He just continued, "The second time we met, Lu Feng was still a high-level warrior. There was no change. But he had already entered the Tao." The corners of his eyes twitched. At this moment, the entire void started to become chaotic. It was like a great calamity with endless ups and downs. Entered the Tao, young man, entering the Tao at such a young age represented a kind of extreme realm, a kind of proof of one's unparalleled future potential. Since the ancient times until now, all those that were able to step into the Tao at a young age were all existences that could roam freely through their time and could be called overlords of their time. In the following 2 months, I used an excuse to get him to cultivate with me. Originally, I just wanted to see how powerful a young man who had stepped into the Tao was, but after 2 months I was shocked. I'm completely shocked. In 2 months, his progress can't even be described as inconceivable. When I clashed with him before, I never used my true strength. But in the end, I almost returned to the peak of my time as a high-level warrior. Although my fleshly body has no limit, and my cultivation technique is only at the most ordinary level, I can still feel the power of my fleshly body. But at that time, I definitely had at least 80% of my strength when I was young. 80% of my battle prowess is enough to rival any king of slaughter. But even so, I still couldn't suppress it. Even in the confrontation with Lu Feng, I could only be at a disadvantage. I can guarantee that the battle prowess that Lu Feng displayed at that time was at least 90% of my peak strength. After a pause, Tu Tianxin's eyes shone with a special brilliance. Moreover, I have a feeling that Lu Feng didn't seem to display his peak strength. At this moment, Luan Gu was really silent. Although Tu Tianxin beside him was many years younger than him, in terms of battle prowess, there wasn't much difference between him and Luan Gu. Tu Tianxin was an evildoer, a truly incomparably terrifying evildoer, an extreme evildoer at the peak. Previously, he was stunning and peerless, invincible in the universe. And Lu Feng could be compared to him. This proved that Lu Feng and him were existences on the same level. This was still not what shocked Luan Gu the most. What shocked him the most was the speed of Lu Feng's cultivation. In 2 months, he went from the strength of the god of slaughter to the emperor of slaughter, to the king of slaughter, and even to the peak of the king of slaughter. No wonder you have such confidence in him. But, is it really okay to put everything on him? Tu Tianxin laughed again when he heard Luan Gu's words. This time around, his smile was filled with ridicule. In fact, there was even a trace of resentment in his eyes. Is it really okay? Let's not talk about whether or not it is okay. Even if Lu Feng can't, what else can you do? Besides him, what else can you do? In the past 500 years, I think you have thought of countless ways, and even personally nurtured this evildoer. But look at the result. In the past 500 years, only Lu Tao had the potential to become the divine king. But in the end, the Nether King had personally destroyed his path to becoming a godly king, making his chances of becoming a godly king incomparably slim. Although he will reach the peak of the virtual king or even the quasi-king realm in the future, he will be able to become the supreme being of the other path. But he is still not the real divine king. His lifespan is not enough to truly help us. If you had chosen to interfere with the Netherworld King back then would we be left with no choice now? Time and space were in chaos and heaven and earth were in turmoil. At this moment, following Tu Tianxin's words, following his display of anger, the entire time and space started to become chaotic, and the whole world seemed to be coming to an end. Luan Gu fell silent when he heard this. He could hear that Tu Tianxin was resentful. He was resentful that he had not done anything when the Netherworld King had broken Lu Tao's path to becoming the divine king. He had no way to refute such resentment, because at that time, he had indeed not done anything out of selfishness, and for a great existence like him, what he had done was done. He would not refute anything, nor would he pretend to hide anything. After a long time, his emotions had completely calmed down. He stretched out his arm and waved it gently. In an instant, the chaotic time and space were completely silent. Tu Tianxin looked at Luan Gu and said slowly, the existence of the Divine King will not wither, grow old, or die for 10,000 years. Any random Divine King has a lifespan of 40,000 years, and as long as they make a slight breakthrough, their lifespan will increase exponentially. But up until now, how many of them have lived for 40,000 years as the Divine King? Since 10,000 years ago, in the entire universe, other than those ancient supreme beings who are in deep slumber, has there been a Divine King who has lived for 40,000 years? The 15 peerless Divine Kings of the human race, any one of them has already broken through the initial realm of the Divine King, and any one of them has a lifespan of more than 40,000 years. But out of the 15 Divine Kings, not a single one survived until now. Could it be that you still don't understand all this? The first Divine King, the third stage of the Divine King mythological domain, was the famous Overlord of this era. But didn't he also disappear in the end? The peerless human king, an existence that has surpassed the overlords of this era, almost comparable to the primitive immortal devil era. No one knows if he is a supreme existence in the legends, but he also disappeared without a trace. Could it be that this does not prove anything? Every word was heart-wrenching. Luan Gu knew what Tu Tianxian had said. But at this moment, when he heard Tu Tianxian say it, his heart could not help but tremble. The Supreme Divine King would not have a good ending. This was a phrase that had been circulating in the circle of kings for the past 10,000 years. In the past 10,000 years, the most famous race had been the human race. In the past 10,000 years, the human race had given birth to 15 Divine Kings. But none of the 15 Divine Kings had a good ending. They either disappeared mysteriously or were annihilated in the endless chaos of war. Even the powerful first Divine King, the invincible human king, the Emperor. In other words, they had lived for 1,000 years. And it was also because of these reasons that there was a rumor that the Supreme Divine King would not have a good ending. This could be said to be a taboo for the Divine King, a taboo for all the Supremes of any race. If Tu Tianxian had not said such words, Luan Gu would have already taken action and killed the person who had spread the rumor. Luan Gu took in a deep breath. He looked at Tu Tianxian with an unusually ferocious expression. I understand what you mean. No matter what, we need a true peerless Divine King. Even the human king of the past, who had been invincible for an era and had surpassed all the overlords of this era, did not have a good ending. Naturally, we cannot escape from it. There is simply no way to solve the problem of one or two Divine Kings. So, we need to cultivate a true peerless one. We need to cultivate a monster that is comparable to or even surpasses the human king. When the time comes, we can rely on the alliance between us and those ancient supremes. Perhaps we might be able to uncover the truth and shatter the curse of a god-king expert. The atmosphere was unusually deep. Their existence was infinitely great, and the entire space-time would change because of their will. At this moment, he stood there quietly. Because of his emotions, this space-time had become an era of endless silence. No matter what, we need a supreme fighting force that is at least at the human king level. Otherwise, the Divine King and the universe will be in danger. Lu Feng had entered alone. Because Lu Tao had already entered the massacre palace. If he went in again, then what appeared would be a tribulation that belonged to him. He was a heavenly god, so the tribulation that appeared would definitely be at the heavenly god level. At that time, if Lu Feng had entered, he would have been obliterated in an instant. Even Lu Tao would not have been able to protect him. Therefore, Lu Feng was the only one who had truly entered. As he watched Lu Feng's final figure disappear, Lu Tao sighed deeply. However, in the next moment, a powerful will rose up and almost stirred up the entire void, causing the entire Iowa massacre star to tremble horribly. At this moment, Lu Tao was like a supreme being that had descended into the mortal world. Power shook the heavens and slaughter was like the sea. His face was filled with a substantial killing intent. This was the monstrous killing intent that Lu Tao had brought with him after killing countless gods. It was a god-slaying power that could never be obtained in the Massacre Palace. His eyes were cold, as if they were the eternal pinnacle of slaughter. Slowly, the cold voice that caused countless living beings to tremble spread throughout the world. I believe that all of you have seen the battle in the Outerverse. However, from the beginning to the end, none of you helped me. I don't blame you for this. After all, none of you helped me back then. Not all of you are powerhouses of the human race. However, those powerhouses of the human race, those powerhouses of the supreme families, I, Lu Tao, will remember your actions this time. I won't do anything. My son will find all the grudges on his own. During this period of time, I do not wish to see anyone harm him. Otherwise, I will help him take revenge, even if I have to give up everything. You should all know the name and origin of Lu Tao. Lu Feng is my son. I will definitely not allow anyone to harm him. The voice slowly faded away. All the beings on the Iwa Massacre Star were people of great statuses. Although they were not clear about what had happened in the previous battle, everyone understood after Lu Tao's reminder. Billions of geniuses in the universe were terrified of Lu Tao. However, this did not include the Massacre Abyss. Lu Tao was the only person in the Massacre Abyss who had been titled the King of Massacre in the past few hundred years. He could be said to be the representative of the Massacre Abyss. He was the idol of all the sons of Massacre, the god of Massacre, and even the Emperor of Massacre. Perhaps these people were not very friendly to Lu Tao because of their family's race, but this did not stop them from worshipping Lu Tao. Now, when Lu Tao said these words, these beings were completely silent. Chapter 220. In a dark space, dozens of rays of light suddenly appeared, dazzling the stars and illuminating the world. Each ray of light represented an extreme powerhouse, an arbiter of the Massacre Abyss. They were truly ancient existences among the arbiters, and they belonged to the ancient arbiters. These people had all given up on their respective races and families, and were willing to stay here forever. Now, because of Lu Tao's words, they had reappeared. This Lu Tao is really arrogant. During the Outerverse War, his strength was only between a level 1 virtual king and a level 2 virtual king. What does this amount of strength count for? Any one of us is enough to completely obliterate him. He actually wants to threaten us, and threaten the entire Massacre Abyss. An old voice came from one of the balls of light. He was a truly ancient existence and an incomparably terrifying powerhouse. If he appeared, he could easily crush a second-rate race and severely injure a first-rate race. Now, because of Lu Tao's words, he was enraged. However, after hearing those words, all of the ancient arbitrators fell silent. After a long while, another voice sounded slowly. You're right. His strength is not enough. But don't forget his identity, his bloodline. Lu Tao's bloodline, Lu Tao's identity. It was the Lu family, the Federation's Lu family. This represented the universe's #1 family and one of the top 2 powers of the Human Federation. It was the most powerful force that could severely injure a peak Overlord race. Everyone understood that Lu Tao's current status was enough to cause the entire Federation's Lu family to go crazy. As for Lu Feng, they also understood that he wasn't weak at all. In fact, he might even be stronger than Lu Tao. His position in the Lu family was probably even more terrifying than Lu Tao's. Many of them were ancient existences that had lived for thousands of years. They naturally understood that if Lu Feng fell because of them, then the Lu family's revenge would be crazy. Their Massacre Abyss could be considered a first-rate power in the entire universe, but compared to a peak race, it was still far too lacking. This was because a peak race represented a godly king's foundation, the Divine King. That was the supreme being of the universe, who even if tens of thousands of virtual kings came together, would have to retreat and submit to. The Lu family, on the other hand, had an existence that could easily flatten the massacre abyss. Therefore, these existences were incomparably afraid of the Lu family. But are we going to let this be? With our status, even if we were placed in a pinnacle clan, we would be like ancestors. But now we are being mocked by Lu Tao, a junior who hasn't even cultivated for 100 years. How can this be tolerated? Another ancient existence spoke. His voice was similarly faintly discernible, making it impossible for others to detect. However, just as this voice disappeared, the voice of an ancient arbiter rang out. You should have all seen the battle in the Outerverse this time. You can think about it. Which human forces have appeared to protect Lu Feng? Many existences fell silent once again. Previously, they had already thought of many existences, which was why they were incomparably silent. The Federation government is the only superpower in the human race that can stand shoulder to shoulder with the human king's Lu family. Their background and terror are not the slightest bit inferior to the Lu families. When they fought against the Demon King, the Federation government had 5 quasi-emperors. Apart from the Federation government, there is another power that is even more terrifying. Whether it was the Federation government or the human king's Lu family, everyone knew how terrifying they were. However, there was a third power that made these existences even more fearful. That was the Federal University. A Void Emperor powerhouse can fight against a Prime. Although these words are somewhat exaggerated, the combat power of a psychic is universally acknowledged. Back then, Celestial Emperor Shen Huang had only just stepped into the realm of a life-and-death quasi-emperor, but his strength was almost the strongest in the world at that time. He was able to fight against a second-stage Divine King, and was even able to use the Heavenly Dharma Supreme technique to drag the Divine King down with him. Who wouldn't be afraid of such strength? How many years has it been? The Federal University has never made a move. No one knows how terrifying their background is. Perhaps the Federal University wasn't much 5,000 years ago, but ever since the Sumru Celestial Emperor appeared, the Federal University has almost become a sacred ground for psychic. This sacred ground has never made a move since 5,000 years ago. Do you know how terrifying it is? When the Demon King appeared and almost wiped out the human race, the Federal University had only produced a few Void Emperors with heaven-defying combat power. However, many existences understood that this was definitely not the Federal University's final trump card. Their strength lay in the fact that no one knew their bottom line. Don't you understand the Federal University's attitude? They want to protect Lu Feng. To be honest, I'd rather go against the Federation government and the human King Lu family than face the Federal University. They're really too terrifying. The ancient arbiter's words caused all the silent light clusters to emit a terrifying wave of energy. From 5,000 years ago until now, the Federal University has never made a move. Can you guarantee that the Federal University doesn't have a Celestial Emperor or an even more powerful quasi-emperor? Once these words were spoken, all existences trembled. Yes, it had been 5,000 years. A whole 5,000 years. The Federal University had never shown his terrifying side. This was what made people fear him the most. There was no need for too much. If only one quasi-emperor appeared, then the Federal University was enough to become the most terrifying race in this era. The incident with the demon race's Demon King 300 years ago caused all existences that coveted the human race to restrain all their thoughts. Although the human race no longer had the Divine King, it didn't mean that they couldn't fight against the Divine King. Although the supreme being of the other path wasn't as strong as the Divine King, it was already an existence that could fight against the Divine King. Perhaps their lifespan couldn't compare to the Divine King, but in this era filled with the Divine King's curse, lifespan didn't matter anymore. We already know that the supreme being of the other path is an ancient ancestor of the human king's Lu family. If another celestial emperor appears in the Federal University, then the human race won't be able to be humiliated. If you're confident that you can withstand the wrath of the top 3 forces of the human race, then you can go find trouble with Lu Tao and Lu Feng. However, everything is your own actions and has nothing to do with the massacre abyss. The last person to speak was an even more ancient existence. After he spoke, all opinions vanished into thin air. The light balls that represented the ancient arbitrators all disappeared. Awesome. His eyes were endless scarlet and filled with a terrifying aura. At this moment, Lu Feng had already started to go slightly crazy. Around him was an endless world of fire. This was a country of lava, a fiery space. Being in this place was like being in the deepest part of a star, and there was a feeling of being burned by the sun. However, Lu Feng understood that, although this place was terrifying, it was still a far cry from being in the center of a real star. If he had been in the depths of a star, then just the temperature of 100 million degrees Celsius would have been enough to evaporate him instantly and make him disappear without a trace. If my father had come in, I'm afraid this place would have really evolved into a star's territory. Unfortunately, it's me now. According to my father, the tribulations here are set according to the person trying to break through. I only have the strength of a martialist, so what appears here should be the limit of a martialist's tribulations. Lu Feng took a deep breath. All the clothes on his body had disappeared the moment he entered. Fortunately, there was nothing else here. Even if he was completely naked, no one would be able to see him. In front of him was still an endless world of fire. Behind him, there was no path to be seen. A full day had passed since Lu Feng had entered this place. During this day, he had been in this terrifying burning state all the time. If it had been anyone else, even if they were the Emperor of Massacre, they would have been defeated. However, the one who had to bear all of this was Lu Feng. Unknowingly, the great demon true body had been activated. Although it could not avoid this painful feeling, it was still very helpful. Of course, the most obvious thing was the increase in Lu Feng's strength at this moment. In the initial stage of a martialist, Lu Feng was only at the initial stage of the second stage of the Great Demon True Body, the Golden Body Great Demon Realm. The tribulations here had brought about a terrifying increase. Right now, his cultivation was rising at a rapid pace. In just one day, I'm already at the peak of the initial stage of a martialist. I'm afraid it won't take long for me to enter the intermediate stage of a martialist. This kind of speed was indeed incomparably shocking. I'm afraid that even those cultivation geniuses who have used heaven-defying elixirs and medicines can't compare to me in terms of speed at this moment. Naturally, their speed was far from being comparable to Lu Feng's. However, those people didn't feel any pain. They even enjoyed the improvement. However, Lu Feng's crazy improvement was one of a kind. If it had been those people, they probably wouldn't have been willing to do this. Fortunately, I've experienced the illusion of 9 lifetimes. Just this kind of tribulations isn't enough to make me lose myself and feel pain. The corners of his mouth were still able to curl up into a relaxed smile. The illusion of 9 lifetimes had made Lu Feng's mind extremely firm. However, these tribulations simply couldn't shake his firm heart. The exit is just ahead. I think the following tribulations will be even more terrifying. When he entered this place, Lu Feng inexplicably received a piece of information in his mind. It was information about the assessment here. Lu Feng didn't know what other people's trials and tribulations were, but he had to go through sections of the road. Lu Feng had to walk through 5 sections of the road before he could be considered to have passed completely. The first level was an endless world of flames. After resting for a while, he activated the great demon power again and realized that his realm had already reached the limit. Although the burning of the flames could still make him feel pain, it was no longer able to increase his strength. Forget it, let's go directly to the next level. In fact, with Lu Feng's current strength, he could have already entered the next section of the road. However, in order to increase his strength, he chose to stay here until he could no longer improve. Chapter 221. Of course, if anyone else were to see this, they would definitely be shocked beyond word. After all, this was only the first level of the lava road, and 99% of the monstrous geniuses wouldn't be able to withstand it. However, Lu Feng had actually taken the initiative to stay here just to improve himself. This really made people speechless. After deciding everything, Lu Feng naturally didn't stay any longer. His speed was almost 10 times faster than before. In an instant, the path that would have taken a day to traverse was completed in just a few minutes. Looking at the deep door in front of him, Lu Feng took a deep breath and stepped in directly. The second path, the path of darkness. In an instant, a few bright words appeared in Lu Feng's mind. They appeared strangely in his mind. As for Lu Feng, who had already experienced it once, he naturally wouldn't be surprised. Lu Feng nodded gently, because he already understood what the ordeal in front of him was without the explanation of the words. Unlike the lava road from before, this path of darkness was truly an incomparably dark world. Here, nothing could be seen and nothing could be sensed. If the lava road was a bright and scorching path, then the path of darkness was a cold and dark path. These were two extremely opposite paths. It could be said that they were completely opposite paths. Of course, if it was just darkness and coldness, then it really wouldn't be considered much of a trial. In terms of difficulty, it shouldn't be ranked behind the lava road. The moment he entered, Lu Feng felt what the true ordeal of the path of darkness was. This was corrosion. The true essence of the power of darkness was the omnipresent invasion. It was a terrifying corrosive force that could corrode the physical body, the heart, and the soul. Lu Feng could feel that if his physical body wasn't abnormal enough, he would have been completely corroded the moment he entered. He would have been completely turned into nothingness and turned into dust. What a terrifying corrosive force! If my physical body wasn't perfect and my bloodline power surged, I wouldn't have been able to hold on for more than a few minutes. Fortunately, I have all of this. Furthermore, I still have the great devil true body. With this, I can guarantee that my soul will remain clear and my physical body will not be damaged. Although the path of darkness is much more terrifying than the path of lava, it's still not enough for me to reach my limit. Although Lu Feng could still speak, he was already drenched in cold sweat. Of course, this cold sweat didn't really appear because the moment it flowed out of his body, the corrosive power of the road of darkness had completely corroded everything. He took a deep breath. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were incomparably bright. This was the only light in the darkness, the only trace of existence. Lu Feng felt that the realm that he had been unable to break through on the lava road was completely shattered after a few moments here. Now, he once again felt that crazy speed of improvement. The great devil true body is indeed worthy of being called a heaven-defying technique. This speed of improvement is unprecedented. However, the price to pay is also unimaginable. I'm afraid that even those heaven-defying evildoers wouldn't want to endure such pain. As he felt his body tremble slightly, Lu Feng took a deep breath. Although he still looked indifferent, his trembling face, which was hidden in the endless darkness, proved that the pain Lu Feng was enduring was extremely unbearable. The more extreme the pain, the faster the improvement. Lu Feng had spent an entire day on the path of lava to reach the peak of the beginner martialist realm. But now, in less than 4 hours after entering this place, he had already reached another limit. I'll wait a few more minutes. If I still can't break through, then I'll just enter the next path. There was no longer nothing in front of him. In 4 hours, Lu Feng had already walked through countless paths and arrived at the entrance of the next path. If it hadn't been for the sake of breaking through, Lu Feng would have already crossed over. For other people, the biggest purpose of entering the abyss was to obtain the final truth. Of course, it was also necessary to increase one's cultivation at the same time. However, unlike them, Lu Feng was the exact opposite. His real purpose of entering this place was to increase his cultivation. In the outside world, it wasn't easy to find such a terrifying place to cultivate. Although he had already become an evolutionary stage martialist, there was still a huge gap between him and those geniuses and evildoers of the same stage. Now that he had transformed and was incomparably noble, how could he allow someone at his age to surpass him? He, Lu Feng, was an emperor, regardless of whether it was in terms of strength or cultivation. He had to look down on all of his peers. Only in this way could he be considered worthy of his name. Another 5 minutes passed. After 5 minutes, Lu Feng's body swayed even more. In this space, every second one stayed here was a second of suffering. This kind of suffering wasn't inferior to the pain of the 18 levels of hell. Finally, when 10 minutes passed, Lu Feng didn't hesitate anymore. In the next moment, he directly stepped into the third path. The third path, the path of illusion the path of illusion? Lu Feng's eyes were slightly dazed. He looked at the empty world in front of him doubtfully, not knowing what was going on. In the next moment, Lu Feng's eyebrows furrowed slightly. This was because Lu Feng had discovered a problem. At this moment, he actually didn't feel the slightest bit of suffering. His entire body felt as light as a feather. It was no different from the outside world. However, for Lu Feng, this was already considered an incomparable enjoyment. Perhaps on the path of lava, he could still talk cheerfully and wittily, happy and contented. However, on the path of darkness, Lu Feng's body was already trembling, and the pain was indescribable. Now, from the endless pain to no pain, the change was almost in the blink of an eye. This made Lu Feng feel as if he had ascended from hell to heaven. No. This is the path of illusion, one of the 5 paths. It shouldn't be so easy here. And this is called the path of illusion. Then, there should be countless illusions here. But why? What I see is still a vast expanse of emptiness. And, Lu Feng closed his eyes and felt it slightly. In the next moment, his face was full of strange distortions. Lu Feng felt it. Although he didn't feel any pain in this place, his cultivation level was still rising rapidly. This speed was several times faster than when he was on the path of darkness. And such a change proved one point, that was, he was really experiencing suffering at this moment. In an instant, the threshold of a high-level martial artist shattered, and Lu Feng directly entered the realm of a high-level martial artist. What is going on? Lu Feng opened his mouth with a trace of doubt, but in the next moment, before he could spit out the last word, everything in front of him changed. This was a world of massacre, a world of death, a world of man-eat-man, a world of gods killing gods. This was a world of death. Everything around him was horrifying. It was a kind of trembling from the depths of the soul, a kind of sorrow of life. Looking at everything around him, Lu Feng seemed to have fallen into a daze. He seemed to have integrated into such a world. Sorrow. Looking at everything around him, Lu Feng only felt a kind of sorrow. A kind of sorrow that came from the depths of his soul. He didn't know when, but a weak life that had just been born was abandoned by his side. But in the next moment, a long sword appeared, and the infant life vanished. Looking at everything that happened in front of him, Lu Feng didn't make a move. He didn't even make the most basic movements. He just watched quietly, not saying a word. In front of him, there were sounds of life in pain and crying. Terrifying scenes that made one's heart tremble constantly appeared. But seeing this, Lu Feng didn't move from beginning to end. From beginning to end, he had a sorrowful expression. On Gufang Star's sky-reaching altar, I experienced the illusion of 9 lives. My willpower is incomparably tough. These illusions are simply enough to affect me. But why do I feel that everything that is happening in front of me seems to be real, as if it really happened? Life is lowly, ants are life, they are lowly in the eyes of us powerhouses. But in the eyes of even more powerful existences, aren't we also ants? Below martial artists, all were ants. As far as martial artists were concerned, even if they were advanced warriors, they were nothing more than slightly stronger ants. Below gods, all were ants. Gods were already complete myth. They had entered another level. Although they were once born from ordinary people and grew up to become gods, they were now at a higher level. But the moment they became gods, they were no longer the weak ants in the eyes of the other gods. Below the Divine King, all were ants. The Divine King was the supreme being of the universe, an existence that stood at the pinnacle of the universe. In their eyes, even gods were ants that could be slaughtered at will. Even the virtual king didn't have the qualifications to call out the Divine King. But was the Divine King really the pinnacle of existence? Were they really the commanding heights of all living creatures? Perhaps the Lu Feng of the past would say yes with certainty. But now he didn't know. Because some of Lu Tao's words made Lu Feng understand that everything in this universe wasn't as simple as he imagined. The Divine King also had 3 levels of the Divine King's mythological domain. And 3 levels of the Divine King's mythological domain meant that he was an Overlord, the most powerful existence in an era. He was an Overlord of an era. And according to legend, in the most primitive immortal devil era, there were even existences that surpassed the overlords of an era. Then, in their eyes, was the Divine King just a slightly stronger ant. Chapter 222. The corners of his mouth curled up into an arc. It was an arc full of smiles. However, this smile was so bitter that it made people speechless. Or perhaps we are all just ants, ants in the eyes of even more powerful existences. However, even an ant should have the dignity and glory of an ant. We are ants, but we won't be ants forever. I, Lu Feng, have never surrendered to fate. Even in my most difficult times, even when I was still a trash, I never surrendered. I never gave up on any hope. Therefore, I became a demon, a genius, and an emperor, Lu Feng. Now I am a martial artist. I have already broken away from being an ant in the eyes of martial artists. What about my future? Will I be able to look down on everything in the future just like I am now? Although he did not answer, Lu Feng's eyes showed an indescribable look. That was determination, that was unyielding. Lu Feng, from the beginning of his transformation, knew the meaning of his existence. He understood that if he did not want to be an ant, then he had to become stronger, to become the strongest. Lu Feng is the emperor. Under the emperor, everything is an ant. The next moment, his arm moved for the first time. A frightening power was unleashed. This was Lu Feng's strongest power. It was the power of the bloodline, the power of the great demon, and even the power of the mysterious and strange power that Lu Feng attracted. At this moment, the void shattered and everything vanished. All the illusions that had appeared before were shattered like a mirror. My willpower is incomparably firm. These illusions will never affect me. Lu Feng kept waving his arm, shattering the horrifying scenes of hell that appeared in front of him. Every moment that they were unwilling to wake up, Lu Feng's footsteps did not stop at all. Finally, after shattering countless illusions, he arrived in front of an ancient void door. Lu Feng knew that 3 paths, he had already walked 3 paths. The next moment it was the 4th path. It was also one of the last 2 paths. As expected, the peak of a high evolution period martial artist. Once again, I am trapped in this shackle. If you want to break through, you have to go through even greater hardships. The torment of the illusion directly affected Lu Feng's soul. Although there was no pain to speak of, such a torment was something that no one wanted to experience. After all, the slightest carelessness in this place could lead to complete annihilation. Their souls would vanish into thin air. If it weren't for the existence of the heaven-reaching altar in Gufang Star, if it weren't for the fact that Lu Feng had experienced the illusions of 9 lives, and if it weren't for his incomparably firm willpower, he would have died. If that was the case, then the third path would most likely be difficult to take. To others, the massacre abyss is a place to pass trials, a place to increase one's cultivation, and a place to explore great secret. But for me, that's not the case. To me, this massacre abyss is actually a path with no way out. Lu Feng had noticed it when he came in. According to what Lu Tao had told him before, once he entered, as long as he felt that he couldn't hold on, then he could leave this place. As for the way to leave this place, that was death. As long as he died inside, then he could leave this place. However, this was impossible for Lu Fenglai. Who was Lu Feng? He was the Emperor Lu Feng. An emperor was born noble and incomparably great. In their eyes, there was only the supreme altar. They were the supreme and great existences who proclaimed themselves as gods and commanded the heavens and earth. Such existences didn't allow for failure. Even the slightest failure would not be tolerated. Death might just be another starting point, a way to leave. However, this was impossible for Lu Fenglai. Because he, Lu Feng, didn't allow for failure, and also didn't allow for death. Even if it was only death for the sake of leaving, it wasn't true death. However, as the emperor, how could Lu Feng allow himself to die once? Therefore, Lu Feng already understood this path when he stepped on it. Either he wouldn't walk in. However, since he had already started, then he would walk until the end, There are still the last two paths. These two paths are destined to be the most difficult paths that surpass everything. However, I, Lu Feng, am not afraid of anything. I won't fail. In the next moment, Lu Feng's footsteps still entered the void door. Finally, his figure completely disappeared. The fourth path, the path of death, this was the true path of death. Because this wasn't an illusion at all. Everything here was the deepest and densest death. Endless disasters of the heavens and earth, all kinds of terrifying tribulations that exceeded the limits of imagination, all descended in an instant. The void of the heavens and earth, the chaos of space-time, the annihilation of time, the hell of the netherworld. Almost all the disasters that could be imagined had all appeared and descended. In just an instant, Lu Feng felt his body collapsing. It was as if his bones and flesh were being separated, and his soul was completely decaying. The first path was the path of lava. However, the flames of the path of smelting were far from comparable to any of the flames that appeared on the path of death. The flames here were not only several times stronger in terms of power, but they also directly burned Lu Feng's soul, making him feel as if his soul was completely burning. Pain, tearing. This was an indescribable injury, an indescribable pain. Endless decay, endless burning, and endless frost. It almost completely shattered Lu Feng's body. The feeling of his soul shattering was even more indescribable. At this moment, Lu Feng felt that his body had already shattered, and countless bones were exposed, appearing in the air. His blood vessels were sinister and abnormally terrifying. In an instant, it seemed that there was nothing left of his body. However, Lu Feng didn't give up. He was still persevering. He was the emperor Lu Feng. Since he was the emperor, then he should have the glory of the emperor. The emperor climbed to the peak by stepping on white bones. At the same time, he also grew through endless tribulations and finally embarked on his own path to the peak. In the past, when he was at the level of a mid-level warrior, he directly faced the existence of a martial artist. At that time, he stimulated his bloodline to the limit, causing his soul to really almost shatter. At that time, every movement he made was a kind of extreme torture, but he still managed to do it. I was so weak in the past, but I still walked to the end. Now I am so much stronger. Now I am even a martial artist at the peak of the upheaval period. I dare to kill him, and I can kill him. I am so strong. I am countless times stronger than I used to be. So, how can I lose to myself, lose to my weak self? I Lu Feng am undefeated! Undefeated! Shouting. This was the cry of the soul. This was Lu Feng's unreconciled roar from the depths of his soul. Although this time the death was not a real death, it was not a real death. His glory told him that he couldn't die, he couldn't die. How could he die like this? The great demon will not die. The great demon will not die. The second stage of the great demon true body, the only divine skill after the great demon realm, was the most powerful combat skill, and was one of Lu Feng's strongest strengths. At this moment, in this endless calamity, he finally understood what it meant to be the great demon will not die. The great demon was an endless demon. Even if heaven and earth withered, even if time decayed, it still wouldn't die, still wouldn't die. This was the demon. This was one of the greatest protagonists in the immortal demon era, the demon. Undying. 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 Lu Feng's roar, Lu Feng's malevolence, Lu Feng's roar, all shook the depths of his soul. The current him had long lost the ability to speak with his physical body. His body had been destroyed by this endless torment, and almost nothing was left. His bones were clear, but there were also countless damages. His blood was scarce, and only some remnants of his flesh remained. The current Lu Feng was incomparably terrifying. However, what was even more terrifying was his heart. It was his heart that never admitted defeat, that never admitted his failure. There had never been a moment like this where his cultivation speed was so terrifying, so fast. Almost in the blink of an eye, Lu Feng felt that his realm was rising at a speed that surpassed everything. The shackles of the high evolution period were completely shattered in an instant. The current him had truly become a peak evolution period martial artist. He, Lu Feng, had become a peak evolution period martial artist. The shadow of death was approaching. In a daze, Lu Feng seemed to have seen his end, and the moment of his death. In the instant when he was enduring endless torment, he had already lost all his thoughts. He was already completely at a loss. However, his willpower was still persevering, still fighting. One step after another. Every step was a form of support for his willpower. Lu Feng knew that the only thought in his mind at the end of his existence was telling him that he could not fall. He was Lu Feng, the Emperor Lu Feng. If he were to fall, he would lose his dignity and honor. Could he, Lu Feng, still be considered the emperor who suppressed everything? Therefore, he could not, would not, and was unwilling to fall. Unknowingly, a blurry door had already appeared in front of Lu Feng. That was the door that led to the final path. However, this door was so ethereal, and there were no traces of it. Unknowingly, Lu Feng had already walked to the edge of the door. However, when he arrived and was about to step in, the door disappeared in an instant, as if it had never really appeared. Lu Feng's footsteps were still so deep. He did not know when it had started, but no blood or flesh could be seen on Lu Feng's legs and feet. All that remained were mottled bones that seemed to have been weathered. Miserable, incomparably miserable, so much so that it could no longer be described as miserable. This was because apart from the image of a living person, Lu Feng's specific details could no longer be seen. Right now, he was nothing more than a skeleton that had almost completely decayed. Terrifying, tragic, desolate. Could it be that I can't do it anymore? Is this my limit? The boundless pain had already numbed Lu Feng's entire body and mind. His willpower had also been completely blurred. In the Nine Lives fantasy realm, he could maintain his original heart and walk to the end. On the red-blue planet, he could burst forth with all his power and fight against a venerable warrior with the fragile body of a mid-level warrior. All these were left behind by Lu Feng's willpower and help. However, now, when this feeling of being completely crushed, this feeling of flesh and blood being separated, and this feeling of the annihilation of the soul came, Lu Feng's willpower also began to sink. He could no longer hold on. However, just as Lu Feng felt that his whole body was numb, and he could no longer feel the existence of any power or his soul. An even more terrifying pain came. Chapter 223. The Fifth Path, the Path of Life. The fifth path didn't pass through any doors and didn't enter any space. However, at this moment it really appeared. It really appeared beneath Lu Feng's feet. Life-death. This was a process that all life had to go through. Since ancient times, no life had ever achieved true eternity. No life had ever lived for an unlimited amount of time. Someone as strong as the Divine King wouldn't wither, age, or die for 10,000 years. His lifespan reached 40,000 years. And this was the lifespan of the earliest Divine King, the earliest Universe Supreme, who stepped into the Divine King's realm. Once they made a slight breakthrough, their lifespan would be extended again until they became an overlord of an era for 1,000,000 years. However, even if they were an overlord of an era, they would still be punished by fate. They would decay and eventually fall into the abyss and disappear completely. There had never been an existence that could transcend eternity, that could truly transcend life and death. Even in the primitive immortal and devil era, the immortals and devils who dominated the universe and created immortal legends eventually disappeared in the long river of history. Therefore, life and death were the boundaries that no one could cross between heaven and earth. Life and death were opposites to each other. However, they both existed. The ultimate sublimation of life was the most magnificent moment, and it was the moment when death arrived. Life and death, the cycle of reincarnation. Fate never stopped. This was life and death. Now, when Lu Feng ensured the last bit of immortality amidst endless death, he was born. He finally stepped into the final path, the final place of tribulation, the path of life. Life was supposed to be synonymous with the most beautiful thing. However, at this moment, Lu Feng, who was growing in this life, who was reborn in this life, felt pain that he had never felt before. This kind of pain surpassed the path of lava, the power of darkness, and even the final path of death. All over his body, flesh and blood kept appearing and regenerating. Pieces of broken bones started to heal slowly, and bits of radiance of life appeared. They were constantly healing and growing. This was the pain of his bones, a pain that far exceeded the pain of having his bones shattered. A red blood vessel began to appear along the bone. This was pain, the pain of the flesh, and it far surpassed the pain of having one's blood vessels ruptured. Every part of him was regenerating. His organs, eyes, face, and even hair were regenerating. However, the pain brought about by the process of rebirth was countless times greater than the pain of destroying them. Lu Feng's soul had already been reduced to the very last bit. What still existed now was only the bottom line of the soul, the final condensation, the final will to exist. However, this pain still made him experience it. It made his will churn and seethe continuously. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Lu Feng's will was incomparably firm. However, when he was reborn on the path of life, Lu Feng felt so much pain that he wished he was dead. This was something he couldn't control. It was an instinctive feeling from his soul. However, the pain continued. It was as if it would never end, as if it would never stop. In an instant, flesh and blood regenerated. However, in the next moment, that voice sounded again. The fourth path, the path of death, the fourth path returned to the fourth path once again. It returned to the fourth path of decay and annihilation. Everything was repeating itself. The newly regenerated body had completely turned into a skeleton at this moment. It was completely decaying and on the verge of being annihilated. Once again, when the skeleton reached its final stage, the path of life appeared once more. Everything was so unimaginable, yet everything was so natural. However, the degree of destruction this time was a little less than the previous time. Just a little, almost nothing could be seen at all. Lu Feng's body was constantly destroyed and regenerated. Once, twice. 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Lu Feng's will had been completely shut down long ago. However, he still didn't wither. In the last corner of his soul, that final will still existed. This was a kind of determination that would never wither in the face of anything. It was a kind of final glory and glory. 10,000 times, 20,000 times. Every time, his body would be destroyed to the limit and then slowly regenerate on the path of life. And every time, the path of death was able to destroy less and less of the area. No one knew how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of times he had experienced this. Lu Feng's body shone with a strange brilliance. It was a kind of brilliance that had never been seen before. He stood there quietly with his eyes tightly shut. At this moment, the path of death descended. It couldn't even destroy a single strand of hair on his body. It couldn't even destroy a single strand of his hair. The path of life didn't affect him in the slightest when it appeared. The path of death didn't cause the slightest damage when it descended. In the deepest part of his soul, in the deepest part that couldn't be destroyed even after billions of tribulations, in the deepest part of his will, a furious roar that shook heaven and earth was suddenly heard. This was an eternal and unyielding roar. It was an anger that wouldn't bow down to anything. I am indestructible. I am indestructible, I can't be extinguished, I won't be extinguished. As long as my will still exists, as long as I, Lu Feng, don't yield, then I will never die. I will never die. His soul had awakened at a rate that could shake everything. In an instant, it was really just an instant. The soul that had been torn apart, destroyed, and tempered countless times completed its final and most thorough rebound at this moment. In the next instant, his tightly shut eyes opened completely. At this moment, he completely recovered and awakened. I am indestructible. This eternal and unyielding roar finally came out of Lu Feng's mouth for the first time. At this moment, he was so terrifying, so sinister, so crazy, and so bloodthirsty. Lu Feng had awakened. The path of death. Every tribulation was enough to make any existence unable to experience it and cause them to completely decay. However, Lu Feng had experienced it millions of times, tens of millions of times, billions of times. He had awakened. He had experienced countless tribulations, but he had still returned and awakened. In an instant, those crazed and bloodthirsty eyes turned sluggish. Lu Feng's eyes were filled with bewilderment, endless bewilderment. After an unknown amount of time, little bits of light finally appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. This was the radiance of reason, a radiance that only living beings possessed. Time passed slowly again. Finally, the feeling of spiritual intelligence in his eyes increased. Finally, when the final moment arrived, Lu Feng's soul completely recovered, after experiencing countless life and death situations and crossing countless tribulations. My will is indestructible, my soul exists forever. This is me, Lu Feng. This is me, Emperor Lu Feng. He had awakened. He had finally awakened completely. At this moment, Lu Feng could no longer feel any tribulations or pain. Everything he had experienced was still vivid in his mind. Those countless life and death situations still existed, but he had already forgotten that kind of pain. I have finally succeeded, once again. Lu Feng quietly closed his eyes and slowly sensed his body. In the next moment, his eyes suddenly opened. Amidst the pain, countless divine lights burst out, filled with countless colors of excitement. Limit. The most extreme limit of a martialist's evolution stage. My physical body. My physical body has also reached 7 times its original strength. My physical body has actually reached 7-fold. The increase in cultivation base level was completely within Lu Feng's expectations. After all, just one life and death ordeal had already far exceeded his limit. Thanks to this kind of ordeal, Lu Feng had practically reached the peak level in an instant. Furthermore, Lu Feng had experienced countless life and death situations. Therefore, this increase in cultivation base level was completely within Lu Feng's expectations. However, the terrifying increase in his physical body was completely beyond Lu Feng's expectations. Physical strength was one of the paths of martialists who had reached the limit of 11 times and attained the Divine King's path. The physical body was widely recognized as the most difficult path to improve among the 3 paths. One could rely on one's innate talent and comprehension to reach a transcendent path by refining hundreds of millions of cultivation techniques. The martial path embodiment could also be forcibly improved through the use of countless resources and divine items. However, the physical body was different, as it was considered a person's innate aptitude. In the universe, there were almost no divine items that could improve one's physical strength. Even if there were, they would be precious treasures that all the top races would be tempted by. In terms of value, such divine items were no less valuable than any divine items that could increase one's lifespan. In the eyes of those races, such divine items were even more precious. I remember that when my father became a demigod, his physical body only increased by 8 times. This was achieved by relying on the second awakening of his bloodline power and the terrifying accumulation of help from the Lu family. Now, when he entered the sky's celestial grade, his bloodline was completely awakened. He only has a 9-fold increase in physical strength. Young Master Luo, my cousin Lu Luo only has a 7-fold increase in his physical body. Normally, after entering the sky's celestial grade and cultivating for a period of time and releasing all of his bloodline power, his physical body should be able to increase by 8 times. This should be his limit. Compared to my father, he is still a little lacking. But this level of strength is already shocking. Lu Luo himself was overflowing with talent. Not only was he the Federation's young paragon, but he was also one of the 7 princes. He had also obtained the title of the Massacre Emperor in the Massacre Abyss. In fact, he was the pinnacle of the Massacre Emperor. The density of his bloodline might not be comparable to Lu Tao's, but in the history of the Lu family, it could be considered exceptionally terrifying. However, such a terrifying existence had only managed to achieve an 8-fold increase in strength after using countless celestial objects and releasing all of his bloodline power. This showed how difficult it was to increase the strength of one's physical body. The Lu family's bloodline is undoubtedly the #1 bloodline in the universe. It is slightly stronger than the Underworld Ancestors' Supreme Underworld King body and the Emperor's Sacred Emperor body of the Emperor clan. Even so, those with extremely terrifying bloodline talents can only increase their physical body by 8 times after their bloodline is completely awakened. Most direct descendants can only increase their physical body by 7 times at most. However, I am currently only a peak evolution martialist. I am still very far away from the awakening of my bloodline. However, I have already achieved a 7-fold increase. In fact, I haven't even used any celestial treasures. My body doesn't have any resistance to those celestial treasures. This is really inconceivable. From now on, even if Lu Feng didn't cultivate his physical body and didn't use any divine items to strengthen his physical body, when he entered the upheaval realm and his bloodline awakened for the 2nd time, he could at least achieve an 8-fold increase in strength. After becoming a god and undergoing a 3rd bloodline awakening, his physical body would be 9 times stronger. Chapter 224. I have bloodline shackles. Most people only have 3 bloodline awakenings at most. However, according to my family, I should have 4 bloodline awakenings. Furthermore, the 4th bloodline awakening is the most ferocious awakening. At that time, I'm afraid that my physical body will increase by at least 10 times. In other words, even if I don't do anything now, after my 4th bloodline awakening, my physical body will increase by at least 10 times. Although a 10 times increase in physical body wasn't comparable to the Divine King's 11 times increase in the Divine King's mythological domain, it was still a terrifying increase that would make billions of races in the universe tremble. As he thought of this, Lu Feng took a deep breath and tried his best to suppress the excitement in his heart. The harvest this time is really too great. Although I don't want to experience this ordeal again, it's still amazing. This kind of harvest is still extremely shocking. The reason I was able to increase my physical body this time is probably because of the billions of life and death experiences that my great demon true body underwent a strange change and completely improved my physical body. Lu Feng had just entered the second stage of the great demon true body, which was the large success stage of the golden body great demon. It would still be difficult for him to continue breaking through. However, he had experienced this kind of ordeal before. One life and death experience was enough for him to become a martialist at the peak of the evolution stage. The remaining billions of life and death experiences were the power of billions of life and death experiences. However, this power couldn't help him improve. Therefore, when it was squeezed to a certain extent, the power of billions of life and death experiences finally started to transform his physical body, allowing him to finally achieve this incomparably miraculous breakthrough. When his excited mood had completely calmed down, Lu Feng could finally move forward with peace of mind. He knew that he had already broken through all 5 paths. Furthermore, even if there were any earth-shattering pain and suffering in the future, it wouldn't be able to sway him like before. After all, this last life and death experience was already unprecedentedly terrifying. As he walked slowly, the entire space and time flowed under his feet. Lu Feng realized that his physical body had not only doubled in strength after the billions of ordeals, but an indescribable mystery had also been integrated into it. This was an existence of life and death. Although it wasn't very obvious, and there wasn't even any power to support it, it was still very powerful. However, the existence of this power was incomparably terrifying in battle. Lu Feng knew that if he wanted to possess a supernatural power in his body, he would have to condense a supreme divine body at the very least. The minimum requirement to condense a supreme divine body was to have a physical body that was 7 times stronger. Of course, it didn't mean that all 7-fold physical bodies were supreme divine bodies. Only when certain conditions were met could one condense a divine body. And the most important thing was the existence of the 7-fold enhancement of the physical body. I can't believe that my body already has a trace of the embryonic power of the god body. Legend had it that only those who had become true gods would be able to increase their physical strength by more than 7 times and use some special heavenly divine items to condense a supreme divine body. But now I actually have the embryonic form. Although it isn't very useful in normal times, once I'm in a real extreme battle with someone, even if there isn't any increase, with the true essence of the power of life and death, I can definitely make my combat strength even more terrifying and even more unparalleled. Lu Feng's eyes were filled with an indescribable light. Before entering here, when he was a peak advanced warrior, he was already an existence that belonged to the King of Massacre with the help of the great demon power in his blood boiling. He was even considered a terrifying existence among the Kings of Massacre. Once he used the support of the strange power, he would definitely be the most powerful demon among the Kings of Massacre. He would be the most extreme demon. However, now that he had become a martialist and his great bronze demon body had transformed into a great golden demon body, he had entered this place and his physical body had been strengthened once more. After refining the mystic mysteries, his terror had already surpassed that of the King of Massacre. Surpassed the King of Massacre? I don't know what that is. But I know that once I comprehend realm, once I refine my cultivation method, Lord, only to the highest level, then I will have the strength to fight and even suppress the King of Massacre in the upheaval phase of the warrior realm. But I know that once I understand realm, once I refine my cultivation method, Lord, only to the highest level, then I will have the strength to fight and even suppress the King of Massacre in the upheaval phase of the warrior realm. The King of Massacre represented the ability to skip a big level and directly challenge the King of Massacre. The King of Massacre in the upheaval warrior realm could defeat the King of Massacre in the perfect stage. And the King of Massacre in the perfect stage was already a true supreme among the young people of the major races. Of course, Lu Feng had the ability to fight and even suppress the King of Massacre in the upheaval warrior realm, but there was no way to fight against the King of Massacre in the perfect stage. After all, the difference between the two was too big. If it was in the past, when I became a peak evolution stage martial artist, I would be equivalent to a peak upheaval warrior. But now, my physical body has become 7 times stronger and my body has refined the occult mysteries. When my technique is condensed to the peak and I comprehend the occult mysteries to the extreme, I'm afraid that even if I face a mid-level perfect stage martial artist, I won't be at a disadvantage. Face a mid-level perfect stage martial artist directly. How terrifying was this ability! It had to be known that Lu Feng had not even cultivated for a year until now. If one were to really calculate the time, Lu Feng's current cultivation speed might have already surpassed that of a human king. For the first time, he had truly surpassed the first ancestor human king. It seems that after this assessment is over, I must go and cultivate for a while. Comparable to a mid-level perfect stage martial artist, the current me already has this kind of ability. Back on Gufang Star, Lu Feng could only look up to the geniuses in the perfect stage when he saw them. But after just a year, he already had the ability to fight against them. This was undoubtedly a miracle, a miracle! His speed became faster and faster, because Lu Feng had already seen it. He had already seen the final destination. That flash seemed to be a huge door connecting heaven and earth. At this moment, Lu Feng's speed had already increased to the limit. This was the speed of a upheaval warrior. In the outside world, even the most expensive hover car could not compare to Lu Feng in terms of speed. This was the terror of a martial artist. In the blink of an eye, the distance of hundreds of miles had completely disappeared. But now, in Lu Feng's eyes, the heaven-reaching door was still incomparably huge. It still did not show any signs of increasing in size. Lu Feng stopped and took a deep breath. He had not expected that this door would actually be so big. Even after traveling hundreds of miles, there seemed to be no change at all. Such a terrifying door was simply something he had rarely seen in his life. The size of this door is probably incomparable to the terrifying crack inside Gufang Star. In this universe there are indeed countless miracles. The 6 great eras, including the primitive immortal devil era, had countless miracles that had been passed down. These were all things that the current universe could not replicate. Therefore, they were called miracles. I don't care anymore. Since I've already come here, then no matter what, I have to go to the end to see what the truth of the immortal devil era is. After taking another deep breath, Lu Feng's speed slowly increased again. This was practically his maximum speed. After about 4 hours, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of the door. Looking at this truly heaven-reaching door, Lu Feng took a deep breath. The terrifying height of this door was absolutely unprecedented. According to Lu Feng's visual estimation, this was definitely more than 100,000 miles. 100,000 miles. This kind of terror was almost equivalent to the diameter of a third-grade life planet. A door comparable to a third-grade life planet, this Lu Feng's shock was indescribable. At this time, he finally slowed down his speed. This was Lu Feng's cautiousness. Although he knew that there should not be much danger here, he was still cautious. However, Lu Feng was still very careful. After all, other than when he was in a frenzy, he was always very careful. The distance was shrinking bit by bit. After walking for a full 50 minutes, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of the door. However, at this moment, Lu Feng's gaze was not in front of the heaven-reaching door. What he was really looking at was the 5 figures, or rather, 5 traces in front of this incomparably terrifying door. Lu Feng was a little shocked and a little puzzled. He could see that these 5 figures, or rather, traces of their existence, had already experienced countless years. They were completely just traces of their existence. They are merely traces, but they seem to be able to exist forever with the world and not be destroyed. What level of existence is this? What level of powerhouse is this? Lu Feng understood that if a mere trace could exist forever with the world, it would at least be an existence of a universe supreme. However, to be able to give him a kind of immortality and invincibility of the current generation, it was definitely not just an ordinary universe supreme. Now, because of the nobility in my life horoscope, nothing can make me submit. Even when facing those miraculous places of the universe, I only feel a kind of vastness of the world and a kind of terrifying engraving of civilization. But now, when I faced these 5 figures, I felt myself trembling. I feel the trembling of my soul. What kind of terrifying powerhouses are these 5? His footsteps once again slowed down countless times. There were only 5 figures in front of him, so there should not be any danger, but Lu Feng still slowed down his footsteps. Aside from his fear, there was even more respect in his heart. This was the respect for an extreme Tao powerhouse. The 5 traces stood quietly in front of the door. They were less than 10,000 meters away from the main door of the door. 4 powerhouses of this level, not to mention 10,000 meters, even a distance of 1 trillion meters was probably nothing. Powerhouses like the Divine King could cause time and space to retreat. Even if they were to pass through a super-galaxy, it would only take them a blink of an eye. Lu Feng looked at these 5 traces, but he was actually unable to see their faces. These 5 traces were all hidden within the endless obscurity. They were protected by the laws of the universe. Even after countless years, they still did not erase the traces of the universe's protection. Lu Feng looked at them quietly, and gradually, an unprecedented divine light appeared in his eyes. I understand. Chapter 225. Lu Feng didn't linger. He walked straight to the centermost mark. This mark was the one that gave Lu Feng the least prestige. However, it was also the one that gave Lu Feng the strongest feeling. The reason it gave off the least prestige was because the person it left behind seemed to be of a very low level. However, the strongest was a kind of true power. Although it was still very weak, its existence seemed to be the only one in the universe. It was the greatest existence among hundreds of millions of beings. This is the number 1 powerhouse in the universe since ancient times. This is the ancestor of my bloodline. This is the human monarch. This mark had actually been left behind by the human monarch. Although it was only a mark, Lu Feng felt a bloodline connection with it. This was a connection that originated from the depths of one's soul. It was a kind of bloodline fetter. When he thought about what the patriarch of the Lu family had said to him, Lu Feng had already determined that this mark, which was obviously not very strong, was the ancestor of the Lu family. It was also Lu Feng's ancestor, the human monarch. The human monarch, Lu Feng slowly muttered as he looked at the illusory figure. However, a moment later, he reached out his arm and touched the phantom of the human monarch. A feeling of extreme danger lingered in his heart. However, Lu Feng had already forgotten his own identity. His previous cautiousness had completely become a thing of the past. Now, a crazed look appeared in his eyes once again. He knew that, although this mark had already existed for thousands of years, the phantom left behind by the human monarch when he was still a martialist was still extremely powerful. However, no matter how powerful it was, Lu Feng still had to face it. That was because he, Lu Feng, only had two goals in mind. This was something that nothing could shake. This was his deepest desire and his final obsession. First, he wanted to dominate the galaxy. Lu Feng wanted to be an emperor. He wanted to be the supreme emperor of the entire universe. He wanted to be the most eternal and most powerful existence in hundreds of millions of space-time continuums. The second was to surpass. However, in Lu Feng's heart, the person he wanted to surpass wasn't an ordinary existence. It wasn't his father who had killed a divine king, who had struck fear into the hearts of millions of geniuses. It wasn't the divine king who had brought chaos to the human race for countless years. It wasn't even the three divine kings who had become the overlords of the epic. In Lu Feng's eyes, in his heart, and even in his soul, there was only one goal. That was the ancestor of his bloodline. That was Lu Feng's ancestor. Human king. Human kings, there were too many legends and too many miracles. I hate the heavens for granting me the emperor's order to live in the same world as the emperor. These were the words spoken by the divine king of the universe's second-level mythological domain, the number one existence of the human race and the number one divine king of the universe at that time, the emperor divine king, before he disappeared. In that era, and even in all the eras after that, human king had always been the number one expert. He was recognized as the number one king since ancient times. His strength had already surpassed all the overlords of the epoch other than the primordial immortal devil era. He was the true number one existence. Only by surpassing him would Lu Feng have the possibility of becoming the supreme emperor, the greatest emperor of all. Therefore, at this moment, when he saw Human King for the first time, even though it was just a trace, he still couldn't help but make a move. Back then, when Human King was at the second-level divine king of the universe's second-level mythological domain, he had once collided with the trace left behind by the overlords of the ancient epic across the river of time and space. Lu Feng's current strength was too weak. He couldn't reach the unparalleled level of Human King. However, he still wanted to give it a try. He wanted to learn from the Human King of the past and collide with the trace left behind by Human King. Finally, after experiencing the obstruction of billions of space-time, after experiencing countless years, Lu Feng's arm finally came into contact with the remnant of the human monarch. At this moment, Lu Feng felt a change. Everything, the entire heaven and earth, the entire space-time had completely changed. Surrounding him was a vast sea of stars and endless space-time chaos. In such a special world, he couldn't see the direction he came from and couldn't see the destination he went from. All he could do was to watch quietly, watch the evolution of space-time in front of him. Soon, in the depths of the endless space-time chaos, a terrifying crack suddenly appeared. This crack tore the space-time chaos, tearing apart the dust of heaven and earth. From that crack in the void, a figure actually walked out slowly. That was an extremely blurry and hazy figure. No traces of existence could be seen. No intertwining of fate and karma could be seen. He seemed to have cut off his own belonging and destroyed all traces of his existence. Lu Feng felt it. He knew who that illusory figure was. That was the Human King. That was the trace left behind by the Human King. Face to face, no words were spoken. Such a confrontation seemed to go on for a long time. However, in the next moment, it moved. The illusory figure immediately moved. It was a simple punch. It was an extremely simple punch. Seeing this punch, Lu Feng's eyes shone with astonishment. This punch of the great Tao was simple. It was an indescribable and evasive punch. Lu Feng never knew that such a punch could exist in this world. When the human monarch had entered this place, He had only been a martial level existence. Therefore, this mark also belonged to a martial level existence. However, this punch had already surpassed everything. Lu Feng had a feeling that even a god would be thoroughly annihilated by this punch. Golden body, great demon. Bloodline boiling. Supreme technique, soul supremacy. In an instant, all of his trump cards were not held back and all of them were unleashed. This was the most powerful attack Lu Feng had poured everything into. It was the most powerful attack he had ever unleashed until now. This attack had already surpassed any terrifying power. It belonged to the absolute invincible power in the evolution stage martial artist realm. Under this attack, even a peak upheaval stage martial artist would be completely obliterated into dust. Peerless and unparalleled in the world. This attack was worthy of any name. However, it was a pity that Lu Feng's final strongest attack, which he had poured everything into, was facing the attack of the strongest existence since ancient times. Although this was only a casual attack, the degree of power was enough to obliterate even a god. Everything was burning to the peak. Lu Feng's madness had never been seen before. His heart was trembling violently. This was his true battle with the human king's imprint. This was Lu Feng's true battle. Although he was not facing the complete human king, it was only a trace left behind by him. However, what Lu Feng was using now was not the power of his main body. Lu Feng was also using his own imprint, his own trace to fight with the human king. The two supreme killing intents collided, world annihilation. This was simply a world of calamity that was like the end of the world. Supreme, unparalleled and unparalleled. Terrifying, exceptionally terrifying. The two great killing powers were about to destroy all existences in an instant, slowly tearing apart the chaos. However, in the next instant, everything disappeared in an incomparably strange manner. Puff! A mouthful of blood was directly spurted out. Lu Feng's arm had already been retracted at some point in time. His face was dim and lifeless. However, Lu Feng's eyes were still filled with endless madness. However, this madness was no longer the kind of arrogance and ignorance, the kind of madness that had lost one's mind. Gradually, the madness in his eyes was extinguished. What replaced it was a kind of helplessness, a kind of sigh. As expected, it's still not enough. Lu Feng had used all of his blessings and supreme techniques to unleash the strongest attack he had ever unleashed in his life. This was enough to be considered an unprecedented feat. However, facing a casual punch from the human king, he was simply unable to block it. He could not even put up a slight resistance. In an instant, the trace of his consciousness was smashed into smithereens. Not even a trace of it was left behind. This represented one point. That was, if he encountered a human king in the present world, he would not have the slightest ability to resist. However, in the next moment, a kind of crazy self-confidence appeared in Lu Feng's helpless eyes again. Just because I can't do it now doesn't mean that I can't do it in the future. This state of mine is still not my limit. My cultivation technique still has room for improvement. My comprehension still has room for improvement. Furthermore, I am facing a human king at the perfect stage. A human king at the perfect stage was definitely far beyond the king of massacre at the perfect stage. It was reasonable that Lu Feng did not have the slightest ability to resist such an existence. Primogenitor, your title is the human king. You are the only eternal king of the human race since ancient times. And I, Lu Feng, am the emperor. I am the strongest emperor in this space-time, forever and ever. This is a battle between us. It is a battle between emperors and kings. It is a battle between emperors and kings. This time, I lost without the slightest ability to resist. However, this does not mean that I will always be like this. One day, I will surpass you. I will completely surpass you. The craziness in his eyes gradually disappeared. However, the determination in Lu Feng's eyes became even stronger. After taking a deep breath, Lu Feng turned around and walked to a trace at the side. This trace gave Lu Feng a feeling of majesty that far surpassed the human king's projection. The two were not on the same level at all. Even if he used all his combat strength, Lu Feng could only get close to it. He did not even have the slightest intention of disrespecting this projection. That's true. Although the human king is an existence that surpasses them and is a terrifying and invincible powerhouse comparable to the supreme existence of the primitive immortal demon era, he was merely a perfect stage martialist when he entered this place. He had not even set foot in the divine spirit realm. However, these three existences have already reached the epic Overlord realm. No matter how heaven-defying and peerless the human king is, he is only a perfect stage martialist. He cannot contend with the epic overlords. When the human king entered this place, he was only a perfect stage martialist and had not reached the divine spirit realm. However, the other three existences that entered this place were all epic overlords. Although they had existed for more than twice as long as the human king, when they entered this place and left behind traces, they were 1,000,000 times stronger than the human king. This trace, it should be our human race's ancestral divine king, the number one divine king, right? Chapter 226. Lu Feng could feel that in this trace, there was a clear wave of energy from the same race. If it were not for the fact that they belonged to the same race, even if Lu Feng was 10,000 times stronger, he would not have been able to walk in front of this trace. The first divine king, the only one in the entire universe who has been given the title of the peerless divine king. His surname is Number One. There are simply too many legends about him. The first divine king was the first great being to become a divine king since the human race stepped into the galaxy age. He was the strongest person in the human race in the past. After the human race entered the galaxy age, he had helped the human race rise several times. When the human race had just entered the galaxy age, the human race was still extremely weak. There were only a handful of people who could become warriors. When faced with the other powerful races in the Milky Way, the human race was destined to be enslaved. This was the truth. At that time, the human race was enslaved by a race called the Heaven Glory race. They were a slave race of that race. It could be said that for 200 years, the human race was in absolute darkness. Compared to the life on Earth on the original star, it was simply incalculable. At that time, the human population had exceeded 10 billion. However, after 200 years of enslavement, the population had plummeted by 90%. At the peak of the population, there were less than 1 billion people. Such a number, within the definition of the entire universe's races, could almost be said to be on the verge of extinction. However, at this most dangerous moment, the first divine king appeared out of nowhere. In a short span of 20 years, from an ordinary person, he had directly reached the realm of a martial artist in the upheaval period. His own power was even more terrifying. He was at the peak of the King of Massacre, or perhaps an existence that surpassed the King of Massacre. His combat prowess was comparable to a deity's. The Heaven Glory race was not considered a powerful race. It was only a third-rate race in the universe. There were less than 10 people in the race who could reach the level of a deity. The strongest person in the race was only a true god. After the first divine king stepped into the realm of a martial artist in the upheaval period, possessing the strength to instantly kill a divine being, the humans had endured and been enslaved for a full 200 years. At this moment when their race was on the verge of extinction, they finally erupted. Terrifying, unparalleled, peerless, magnificent. Many experts and geniuses of the human race continued to emerge. That was the first golden age in the history of the human race, and it was hailed as the first golden age by the later generations. And during the 15 years of resistance, many geniuses of the human race emerged one after another. In a short 15 years, tens of thousands of martial artists had appeared. The strongest among them even possessed strength comparable to that of a deity. 15 years later, the first divine king shattered all the shackles and directly entered the realm of true gods. In fact, he was even a peak true god. Although he was not as heaven-defying as the kings of the later generations, the first divine king was an epic overlord at the true god realm. He was also resplendent in the entire galaxy and was almost hailed as the #1 extreme Tao demonic genius of this epoch. As a true god, he was already extremely heaven-defying. If the virtual king didn't appear, no one in the vast universe could compete with him. 35 years after the birth of the first divine king, the human race finally achieved complete independence. With the help of the first divine king, many geniuses of the human race continued to make breakthroughs. In order to commemorate the greatness of the first divine king, the later generations designated the era when the first divine king was born as the first calendar. Even now, other than the traditional Christian calendar on Earth, the first calendar was the most important time for the Federation. In the 47th year of the first calendar, the first divine king made another breakthrough. He became a deity and intimidated the universe. And at this time, the human race finally gave birth to the first god spirit other than the first divine king. In the following 100 years, the geniuses of the human race achieved great success one after another. Divine martial arts experts continued to emerge. There were even geniuses who rushed into the realm of true gods. In the 200th year of the first calendar, the human race was already a well-known first-rate race in the universe. In the Milky Way, apart from the Aries race, the surging wave race, and the nether race, the human race was the strongest. At this time, the three peak overlords finally realized the terrifying potential of the human race. As the surging wave race had a direct relationship with the human race, they finally made a move. The surging wave race was a peak overlord race in the universe. Although they were not as strong as the Aries race and the nether race, they still had a newly ascended divine king and an old king. Otherwise, they would not have been able to occupy 30% of the Milky Way, which was coveted by billions of races in the universe. At that time, the surging wave race attached great importance to the human race. They even sent an ancient virtual king of level 7 to lead many virtual kings and divine martial arts experts in their first expedition. They wanted to exterminate the human race in one fell swoop. Just as they thought, the human race could not resist at all. The human race had already reached the peak of the first-rate race. But this kind of awe-inspiring reputation was virtually obtained by relying on the #1 divine king alone. Without the #1 divine king, then the human race would only be an ordinary existence among the second-rate races. Faced with the surging wave races lineup, the human race was beaten to a pulp without much resistance. When the human race was in danger, the first divine king appeared again. Ever since the human race stabilized, the first divine king traveled the universe to achieve a breakthrough. In the following 150 years, he almost never existed in the Milky Way. Whether it was the human race or the other races, the information about the first divine king was intermittent. After the first divine king left for 50 years, there was no more news about him. In the universe, even among the human race, most of the beings had already assumed that the first divine king had fallen. However, at the most critical moment, when the human race was facing the greatest danger in history, the first divine king appeared. The virtual king. Not only was he a weak virtual king, but he was a terrifying existence above the level 8 virtual king. The level 8 virtual king had a combat power that made billions of races tremble in fear. He made the entire Milky Way sink under his invincible majesty. The mighty army of the surging wave tribe was annihilated in an instant. Even the few 8th-layer origin kings hidden in the army specifically to kill the #1 divine king did not even show the slightest majesty before they were completely annihilated. Powerful, incomparably powerful. terrifying, extremely powerful. The number one divine king had shown the entire universe how terrifying he was, proving his glory as the most terrifying monstrous genius in this era. One man, one kill, blood flow until time trembles, and living beings die out until the universe collapses. The surging wave race was one of the most powerful races in the entire universe. It could be said that the three races that could occupy the Milky Way were the top races among the top races. It was such a powerful race, a peak race that wasn't any weaker than the war god race, and even had two old and new kings overseeing it. But in the end, they were defeated in the fight against the first divine king for 20 years. In the strongest battle 20 years later, the first divine king shook the universe. He actually went from the level 8 divine king to the limit of life and death quasi-king. And at the last moment, he suppressed the two divine kings of the surging wave race by himself. Since then, the first divine king's name finally became the most resounding existence in the entire universe. It was to the extent that even Sakra Divine King, the ancestor of the number one Emperor clan bloodline, Sakra Divine King, couldn't suppress it. In the following eras, the first divine king began to improve crazily. 100 years after entering the life and death quasi-king realm, he broke through the life and death secret realm and finally rushed into the divine king's domain. In the divine king's realm, he was invincible. He once faced the divine king head-on, but he was still able to suppress him. In the end, the divine king's curtain fell, and between the human race and the emperor race, it could be said that there was a great enmity between them. However, because of the first divine king's terrifying power, the emperor race simply could not resist and could only leave the matter unsettled. In the following period of time, the human race ushered in a terrifying golden age under the leadership of the first divine king. They conquered countless races and reigned supreme in the Milky Way. In the end, the human race became the number one overlord race in the world. In the 1000th year of the first calendar, the human race's golden age had three divine king coexisting. At that time, the first divine king had already reached the peak of the level 2 divine king realm. Just when the human race was at its peak and was about to dominate the entire universe, the first divine king suddenly disappeared, never to be seen again. About 2,000 years ago in the first calendar, there was a terrifying fluctuation that shook the entire universe, and this aura made the human race feel very close to it. At that time, the human race knew that the number one God King had made a breakthrough and finally entered the battle strength of the 33rd layer of the ultimate heaven, becoming the third overlord of this epoch. The first divine king was a great legend in the human race. He was the symbol of the human race's resistance, self-improvement, and ceaseless struggle. It could be said that without the first divine king, the human race would have disappeared long ago, completely annihilated in the long river of history. Hence, towards the number one divine king, Lu Feng harbored incomparable respect from start to finish. His respect for the human monarchs was a kind of respect between martialists. As for the number one divine king, it was a kind of respect from the bottom of his heart. Therefore, when he saw the traces of the first divine king, Lu Feng could only bow deeply. After taking one last look at the traces left by the first divine king, Lu Feng turned around and looked at the two terrifying marks beside him. Lu Feng knew that the owners of these two marks should be the same as the first divine king. They were the two overlords born at the beginning of this epoch, the great demon Sky Emperor and heavenly venerate Netherworld. However, Lu Feng didn't know as much about these two as the first divine king. Furthermore, there were only two marks, so he couldn't determine which one was heavenly venerate Netherworld and which one was the great demon Sky Emperor. The first divine king is the peerless divine king of the human race, the overlord of this epoch. Any human martial artist could get close to him. After all, the first divine king represents tolerance and greatness. As long as you're from the human race, you won't offend His Majesty. However, these two ancient overlords are different. I'm from a completely different race from them. Once I approach them, I'll be obliterated by these two marks in an instant. Lu Feng's guess wasn't wrong. Although these marks were left behind millions of years ago, they were still the overlords of this epoch. The overlords of an epoch were the symbol of invincibility in an era. The marks left behind by the overlords of the ancient epoch hadn't been obliterated even after countless great calamities of the universe. The time that had passed couldn't even be described by hundreds of millions of years. Therefore, the baptism of millions of years hadn't damaged the power of these two marks at all. The marks left behind by the Divine King can easily kill a true God powerhouse. As for the marks left behind by the overlords of this epoch, I'm afraid even a virtual king powerhouse wouldn't be able to withstand them. Therefore, it's better for me to stay away from these two marks. Lu Feng smiled helplessly and walked toward the last mark. Gradually, Lu Feng arrived at a place that was relatively close to the mark. At that moment, a terrifying majesty swept over and almost suppressed Lu Feng completely. In that split second, Lu Feng took a step back decisively and finally retreated out of the range of the majesty. Lu Feng was filled with indescribable fear and astonishment as he looked at the mark. Such majesty was probably comparable to that of heavenly venerate Hades and the great demon Sky Emperor. Terrifying and extreme. Those were the marks that left the deepest impression on Lu Feng. I'm still far away from the range of this mark, yet I'm already suffering from such a terrifying suppression. It's hard to imagine if I'll be obliterated in an instant if I really get close to it. Could this be another epoch overlord? Is this a reclusive overlord of an epoch? Chapter 227. In the eyes of 99% of the living beings in the entire universe, the Divine King was already at the pinnacle. However, in the eyes and hearts of the true extreme Tao experts, only the epoch overlord was the true pinnacle of an era. However, while the universe could tolerate the existence of the Divine King in seclusion, it couldn't conceal the existence of the epoch overlord. When the epoch overlord shattered all taboos and attained the combat strength of the 33rd level, a shocking phenomenon would occur in the entire universe. The living beings in the entire universe would be able to sense the complete majesty of the epoch overlord at that moment. Therefore, the birth of the epoch overlord was definitely known by the entire universe. However, until now, there had only been 3 instances of the birth of an epoch overlord that caused the universe to tremble. These 3 existences were the remains of the 3 marks in front of Lu Feng. Of course, there were exceptions. This was because their progenitor, the human monarch, was an existence that could conceal everything. If Lu Tao hadn't told him personally, Lu Feng wouldn't have known that the human monarch had actually attained the epoch overlord realm in this epoch. Could this be another terrifying existence comparable to the human monarch? No. Although he gives me a strong feeling, His Majesty can't be compared to my progenitor, the human monarch. Or perhaps this isn't the epoch overlord at all. However, I feel that the power of this existence shouldn't be inferior to the epoch overlord realm. When these 3 marks were left behind, the 3 existences had already attained the epoch overlord realm. However, these marks have a power that isn't inferior to theirs. It seems that the person who left these marks should be extremely close to the epoch overlord realm. However, why isn't there any record of him in history? Furthermore, Lu Feng's brows furrowed slightly. He could sense the strangeness of these marks. Firstly, in terms of time, Lu Feng felt that these marks were left behind very recently. They weren't as old as the other epoch overlords. In fact, they were slightly newer than the mark of the human monarch. This was even more impossible. After all, it had only been a few thousand years since the human sovereign realm. Perhaps it was because the human king was too dazzling that although there had been the birth of divine kings in the past few thousand years, none of them had been able to reach the second stage of the divine king realm. Therefore, it was very likely that this being was an overlord of an era. He should not be a peerless existence that had appeared in the past few thousand years. Moreover, compared to the first point, what made Lu Feng even more suspicious was the surging power in the marks. Unlike the previous three overlords, this place possessed an extremely surging mental power. It was as vast as the ocean and as terrifying as the galaxy. This kind of power, compared to a martial artist, seemed more like a psychic's existence. Since ancient times, there have only been a few psychic cultivators who have been given the title of heterodox supreme. There were 3 great heavenly emperors of the human race, and 1 psyche master heavenly emperor of the heaven devil race. There were only 4 of them. These 4 heavenly emperors, even the strongest heavenly emperor Shen Huang, could not possibly have such terrifying power. In terms of time, there was also a difference. Therefore, it could not be them. But who is he? Lu Feng fell into deep thought. He knew that this being, who was an overlord of an era, should be a psychic or a psyche master. However, he did not know what his true identity was. After pondering for a long time, Lu Feng thought of all the supreme beings he was familiar with, but he realized that none of them could be this being in front of him. Finally, he put it aside and stopped thinking about it. At that moment, his gaze was focused in front of him, in front of the heavenly door. Is this the legendary place that contains the secret of the destruction of the immortal devil era? I am the 6th being to come here. Then, am I the 6th being to know all the secrets? Even though Lu Feng had experienced 9 lifetimes of the illusion and was mature at a young age, he could not help but feel shocked and excited when the secret was about to appear in front of him. He was not the only one. Even a true overlord of an era would be endlessly excited when he appeared here. The primeval immortal devil era was the starting point of all eras. It was the greatest and most glorious era in history. In that era there were countless supreme experts. Those titled immortals and demons were all terrifying overlords like the virtual king and the virtual emperor. Some of them were even terrifying existences like the divine king. In that era there were even supreme beings at the human king level. Their strength had surpassed the divine king and the divine emperor. They were the true strongest beings since ancient times. However, such a terrifying era that could almost ignore the great calamity of the universe had suddenly disappeared completely, leaving behind only those miracles to tell the future generations about the glory of their existence. Now that Lu Feng might be able to unravel the secret, he could not hold it in any longer. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the terrifying door. The entire door gave him an extremely ancient feeling. The desolate aura within even caused his soul to tremble continuously. Lu Feng knew that what the great ancestor had told him was right. The massacre abyss had indeed existed for countless years. Such an ancient and desolate aura was not something that could be found in this era or even the recent few eras. Is this the door that contains the greatest secret since ancient times? Finally, it seemed that he could not wait any longer. Lu Feng hesitated for a moment. Eventually, he stretched out his arm and gently touched the ancient door. 1 second, 2 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 1 hour. Finally, when the second hour came, Lu Feng's face twisted slightly. What the hell is going on? Why hasn't there been any change? The only way Lu Feng could think of to open the door was to touch it directly and trigger the imprint within. He had only reached this place after walking through 5 paths. Logically speaking, he already had the right to enter and know everything. However, everything was ordinary. There was not the slightest change. How could Lu Feng not be excited? Could it be that I have to rely on my own strength to open this ancient door? The ancient door had a terrifying height of more than 100,000 miles. It was almost comparable to the diameter of a level 3 planet. Moreover, he did not know what material the door was made of. Since it could withstand countless eras and billions of calamities of the universe without being damaged, it was imaginable how terrifying it was. Lu Feng really did not know what would happen if he used brute force. I'm afraid that even the Divine King wouldn't dare to use brute force to open this place. How can I, an existence who has not even attained the divine martial realm, do it? Lu Feng sighed. That was all he could do now. If he was an epic overlord, perhaps he would really try using brute force to open the door. After all, an epic overlord represented the peak combat power of an era. Unfortunately, he was not an epic overlord. Unfortunately, my strength is still not enough. Although he had exceptional aptitude, and even had the terrifying heaven-defying ability to challenge the human king, his current strength was still too weak. He had no way to deal with these miraculous existences that could frighten even divine kings and supremes. After standing in place and waiting for another 5 hours and realizing that nothing had changed, Lu Feng finally walked in the direction he had come from. He slowly walked into the door from which he had come. Then, Lu Feng's figure finally disappeared completely from the core area of the massacre abyss. However, Lu Feng would never be able to see the heaven-reaching door open after he left. Billions of heavenly laws and all sorts of profundities gushed out, and a figure slowly walked out from the door. In the end, you still woke up. You still came. What a pity. What a pity. Now is not the time. You are too weak. Compared to your past glory and glory, the current you is not even qualified to be called an ant. Time, we still have time. We can wait. In the past, you held up the backbone for all living beings. This time, let us continue your future path and light the way for you. Lu Feng went back along the path he had come from. Among them, Lu Feng once again went through the path of life and death. To him, this was a path of no return. Just a single trial of life and death had caused him to sink to the bottom of the abyss. Only the undying will in the end had slowly preserved the hope of survival. However, this time, Lu Feng no longer posed any threat when he returned. His physical body contained the great mysteries of life and death. The path of life and death posed no threat to him. Similarly, the path of illusion, the path of darkness, and the path of lava posed no threat to him either. Lu Feng did not leave as quickly as he could, as though he wanted to recall the endless suffering he had gone through. He had chosen to walk out step by step. After spending 3 whole days, Lu Feng finally saw the Palace of Light. This was the only place of light in the entire massacre abyss. It was also the only place without any tribulations. As he stood in the Palace of Light, Lu Feng turned back to look at the center of the abyss for the last time. His eyes were filled with complex emotions. He had experienced too many tribulations in this place. The feeling of life and death had made him completely lost. However, by relying on his last remaining will, he had still succeeded in breaking through everything. In the end, he had obtained a great protection. However, in the final place, where all the difficulties had disappeared, he had been blocked and lost the opportunity to see what was going on. Even though Lu Feng had obtained a great harvest, he still couldn't help it. However, he was still unwilling to give up. Finally, with a single step, Lu Feng left this place completely. Chapter 228. Outside the palace, Lu Tao waited quietly. Lu Feng had already spent a total of 5 days in here. In the past, other than the overlords of the 3 sects and the human kings, the rest of the people would come out in 3 days at most. Back then, he only had 3 days. He had tied the record for the highest time. However, there was still a certain distance between him and the final destination. Yan Chunwei, who was beside him, had a calm look in her eyes. However, if one looked closely, one would be able to see the hint of anxiety in the depths of her eyes. Although she was Queen Wei, a terrifying expert who was almost at the level of a heavenly god. She was now Lu Feng's mother. Tao, is Xiaofeng really all right? Finally, when the 5th day passed, Yan Chenwei could not help but ask Lu Tao, who was beside her. Hearing Yan Chenwei's words, Lu Tao could only smile helplessly. The serious expression that he had maintained for 5 days completely disappeared at this moment. He sighed slowly and said, "Chenwei, it's not like you don't know the situation inside. Back then, you had also entered here. I remember that you also persevered for 2 days before coming out. Although you failed in the end, your results are already considered terrifying among all the female experts. You should know the situation inside as well. It's impossible to die in here. Since ancient times there has never been an accident. Moreover, the longer you persevere in here, the greater the benefits you will receive, and the more terrifying your potential will be. Don't you feel the existence of the divine senses in the surroundings?" Hearing Lu Tao's words, Yan Chenwei was slightly taken aback. Suddenly, an extremely cold expression appeared on her face. She released her senses and finally felt the divine senses that Lu Tao was talking about. On the 3rd day that Xiaofeng entered here, these divine senses began to appear one after another. By the 4th day, the spies of the large clans and the arbiters of the massacre abyss should have been alerted. After all, being able to stay here for 4 days was already a terrifying achievement that ranked in the top 10 of this epoch. You should know that of these 10 people, aside from the 3 who died because they were besieged, the other 7 were at least quasi-kings. And now, Xiaofeng has been here for 5 days. Apart from the 3 overlords of the epoch and my progenitor human monarch, no one else in this era could achieve such a result. Without a doubt, this has already proven Xiaofeng's potential. I believe that after seeing the birth of such a terrifying monster, I fear that even with the deterrence of the Federation government and my human King Lu family, those races still won't feel at ease. As long as Xiaofeng leaves the Milky Way and the territory of the human race, I'm afraid they will use all means to kill Xiaofeng. Yan Chenwei was also clear about these things. After hearing Lu Tao mention it again, her expression became even colder and her killing intent became even more intense. Looking at Yan Chenwei, who seemed to be slightly moved, Lu Tao smiled slightly. He gently hugged Yan Chenwei tightly in his arms. "However, you don't have to worry too much. After all, Xiaofeng won't leave the Human Federation in a short period of time. Moreover, even if he leaves, the human race isn't just for show. Back then, the human race was the #1 race in the universe, even though it has declined now. We still can't be humiliated. There are billions of races in the universe. Other than the Emperor race, no other race dares to go against us. Moreover, with the protection of the Lu family and the Federation government, as well as the Federal University that has never made a move, unless several races attack together, no one can touch Xiaofeng." Lu Tao's voice was extremely loud. He did this on purpose to let those beings hear his word. When Xiaofeng entered, I had already contacted the Great Ancestor. The Great Ancestor said that he would awaken the sleeping ancestor at the time of need. Therefore, unless an expert like the Divine King comes personally, Xiaofeng will be safe and sound here. Hearing this, Yan Chenwei breathed a sigh of relief. Although she was dissatisfied with the human monarch Lu family because of the treatment Lu Feng received when he was young, she was incomparably convinced of the strength of the Lu family. The Lu family had been in chaos for 500 years. This was not a casual remark. As if they had heard Lu Tao's words, the divine senses around them were obviously much more restrained. They were naturally terrified of the human monarch Lu family and the Federation government. As for the even more mysterious Federal University, it was even more frightening. With the protection of these 3 great powers, as long as Lu Feng did not take the initiative to enter some dangerous places, he would be able to develop without any worries. Time passed slowly. Originally, many beings had thought that Lu Feng might not be able to come out on the 5th day. However, a figure slowly walked out of the ancient hall. Yan Chunwei broke free from Lu Tao's embrace and arrived in front of Lu Feng in one step. Lu Tao, who was next to her, smiled helplessly. However, there was a strange look in his eyes. It was a look of relief mixed with regret. Unfortunately, he still failed. However, to be able to last for 5 days, Lu Feng is indeed an exceptionally terrifying genius. Even if he is unable to become the 4th epoch overlord in the future, it is still possible for him to become a second-level divine king realm temporal supremacy. He has the human monarch bloodline and the strange blessings we saw. I'm afraid that when he becomes a temporal supremacy, his combat strength will truly be heaven-defying. At that time, he will probably have the strength of an epic overlord. In the endless void, Luan Gu sighed softly when he saw Lu Feng appear. His current mood was the same as that of many beings. He was slightly disappointed. After all, the great secret of the primordial immortal demon era was something that every powerhouse wanted to know. Tu Tianxian only smiled coldly when he heard this but did not say anything else. Luan Gu glanced at Tu Tianxian. When he saw that he was silent, he finally fell silent and stood quietly on the spot, as if he was calculating something. Lu Feng had entered the true core of the massacre abyss and stayed there for 5 days. This once again caused a sensation in the entire massacre abyss. However, this sensation was only spread among the true powerhouses. After all, to the sons of massacre, the sky of massacre, and even the god of massacre, they had no way of knowing the secret of the massacre abyss. Of course, the sensation caused by Lu Feng this time was even more terrifying than when he had fought the 5 overlords alone. He was a titled emperor and possessed the strength of the massacre king. However, the sensation caused by this news was suppressed in a very short period of time. Many beings understood that this was done by the adjudicators of the massacre abyss. However, this suppression of the news was just for show. Everyone understood that Lu Feng's name was probably already on the table of the top powerhouses of the various top races. Perhaps the top races would not do anything, as the human race was not very powerful, but it did not have much to do with them. However, the top races had no choice but to take this seriously. Back when the first divine king had become an epic overlord and become a human monarch, the human race had been able to suppress all the top races and cause them to suffer huge losses. If another human monarch had appeared, the top races would definitely not be able to accept this. Many beings understood that they had already decided that they would do everything they could to kill Lu Feng at any cost as long as they had the opportunity. Of course, this was only the plan that the top powerhouses of the top races had come up with. At least for now, before Lu Feng displayed sufficient improvement speed to match his potential and before Lu Feng made a big enough mistake, they would continue to bide their time. In Lu Feng's room on the Iowa Massacre Star, Lu Feng's family of 3 was present. The pill that Lu Tao had given to Lu Feng, the square-shaped metal object that had been born in the epoch of time, had been completely released. Lu Feng did not hide anything. He told Lu Tao and Yan Chunwei everything that had happened in the massacre abyss. When they found out that Lu Feng had really made it to the end, they were shocked. Even though the two of them were of high status, they were still shocked and pleasantly surprised. However, when they found out that Lu Feng had not opened the final door, they also looked extremely regretful, just like Lu Feng had before. It's alright, Xiaofeng. Actually, not opening the door is already considered good for you. And this time, the benefits you've gained are simply too great. A 7-fold increase in physical strength has already surpassed your father's by 1 level. You have to know that even our human clan's old enemy, the Nether clan's imperial family, who has the supreme underworld king physique, only has a 5-fold increase in strength when they enter the evolution stage. However, you have already surpassed them by 2 whole levels. This kind of gain is already enough. Lu Tao was the one who had the deepest understanding of Lu Feng's physical strength enhancement. He naturally knew how difficult it was to enhance the physical strength enhancement. In the later stages, especially after becoming a god, the terrifying power of the physical body would be fully displayed. This kind of power could not be completely summed up by the so-called increase in strength. Plus, I think you're lucky that you didn't open the final door and enter it. Lucky? Lu Feng was slightly stunned. However, a solemn expression soon appeared on his face. He nodded gently. Lu Feng already understood the meaning behind Lu Tao's word. Now that he heard Lu Tao mention it, he knew that once he really opened the door and entered the final secret place, the entire massacre abyss would undergo a shocking change. At that time, even if they did not personally come to monitor him, the powerhouses of those races would probably already know that he really knew the final secret. This was the truth behind the fall of the immortal and devil era. It was something that only the three overlords and the human king knew about. Unfortunately, the three overlords and the human king had already completely disappeared. It was unknown whether they had died or hidden themselves in a deep sleep. In short, in this era, there was no one who knew about this secret anymore. This could be said to be the greatest secret in the history of the universe. Even a powerhouse like the Divine King would be excited and would probably personally descend. The Lu family was terrifying, the Federation government was powerful, and the Federal University was incomparably mysterious. However, once the Divine King of those races descended, even the combined forces of these three factions would not be able to protect Lu Feng. At that time, even if he revealed the secret, it would be difficult for him to escape the fate of death. After all, the fact that he had been able to reach the end was already proof of his heaven-defying aptitude. After experiencing the incident with the first Divine King and the Human King, these peak overlord races would definitely not allow such a heaven-defying monster like him to exist. Therefore, the final door to heaven had not been opened, the final secret had not been revealed, and the shocking phenomenon had not been triggered. This was actually a good thing for Lu Fenglai. Xiaofeng, according to what you said, your body has already undergone a transformation. Your willpower has also reached a terrifying level. It already possesses willpower comparable to that of the epic overlords and my ancestor, the Human King. In that case, wait until you enter the domain of the Divine King. Wait until there is no existence in the entire universe that can oppose and punish you. Then, you can enter the massacre abyss and obtain the final secret. This was Lu Tao's idea. He did not know now, but that did not mean that he would never know. As long as he waited until Lu Feng's strength was strong enough and the billions of races in the universe were no longer a threat to him, Lu Feng would once again enter this place and obtain the true answer he needed. Chapter 229. Lu Feng nodded gently. Indeed, he also wanted to know the secret behind the destruction of the primordial immortal demon era. However, now that he knew, it would only bring about disaster. Lu Feng wanted to wait until he was so powerful that no one could stop him before entering this place to obtain the secret he needed. After pondering for a moment, Lu Tao looked at Lu Feng, seemingly thinking of something. After a long while, he finally spoke. Xiaofeng, as for the fifth epic overlord you mentioned, it might be a psychic existence. I think I should know about it. The moment he heard this, Lu Feng's eyes lit up with surprise. He had two biggest secrets after entering this place. The first was the true number one secret of the universe, the truth behind the destruction of the primordial immortal demon era. Unfortunately, this was the easiest thing to find out. However, because he couldn't open the door to the heavens, he had no chance of finding out. As for the second secret, it was the fifth trace that he had seen. It belonged to a psychic, the trace of the epic overlord. Lu Feng hadn't expected that Lu Tao seemed to know about this existence. Actually, it's normal that you don't know. Among the billions of races in the entire universe, I'm afraid only the Lu family knows about this existence. In the Lu family, only the patriarchs of the direct bloodline know a little about it. Back then, I only found out after hearing about it from the great ancestor. It turns out that there is such a terrifying, monstrous psychic in the human race. Lu Tao sighed after saying that. He had known about this existence back then because of Lu Feng. At that time, he had communicated with the great ancestor after finding out about Lu Feng's talent development quotient. The great ancestor had also told him everything at that time. Xiaofeng, your talent development quotient is 2. 4. You are known as the first person since ancient times. You should understand this, right? Lu Feng nodded gently. Although his talent development quotient was as high as 2. 4, it was given after he had condensed the divine origin. But what he had was what he had. If it had not been for the fact that Lu Xian had the highest talent development quotient in all of history, Dao Songtian would not have asked the Lu family directly for him. Moreover, when Lu Feng was in danger, he would not summon 3 heavenly masters to come here just to protect himself. Your teacher, Dao Songtian, has a talent actualization quotient of 2. 2. In history, the 3 celestial emperors who could fight and slay supremes all had talent actualization quotients of 2. 3. Once a monstrous genius with a talent development quotient of 2. 4 appeared, they would have the possibility of becoming an eternal God Emperor. The primordial God Emperor is a true overlord of an era. Indeed, your aptitude as a psychic can be said to be the best in history. However, you are not the only one. Apart from you, there's another Psyche Master Freak, who has also reached 2. 4 talent development quotient. Lu Tao's eyes were filled with boundless divine light at this moment. A talent development quotient of 2. 4 meant that he had the potential to become an overlord of an era. After listening to Lu Feng talk about the existence of the mark, Lu Tao understood that the Psyche Master Void Emperor he knew of had already stepped into the realm of the Eternal God Emperor. He had already become the first existence to become an Eternal God Emperor in this era, apart from the primordial immortal Devil era and the Magic era. According to what you said, I'm afraid that the Void Emperor who had a talent actualization quotient of 2. 4 in the past had truly transcended all shackles and broken all shackles, entering the realm of the Eternal God Emperor. This should be the truth. I don't know the name of that Eternal God Emperor. Not only me, but I'm afraid no one in the entire universe knows. His origin is very mysterious. We only know that he belongs to the human clan. His appearance is too strange. It's almost as if he appeared out of thin air in the universe. Back then, his combat power was unparalleled, and he once fought with my ancestor Human King. It was a battle of the same realm. At that time, my ancestor Human King had yet to enter the realm of the Divine King. However, as a virtual king, he was almost invincible in the current era. Apart from the Divine King, no one could compete with him. However, the primordial celestial emperor was able to match my primogenitor Human King at the same cultivation level. Although my primogenitor Human King defeated him at the last moment, he had to pay an unimaginable price to do so. After the battle, the Void Emperor disappeared completely. Then, my ancestor Human King entered the realm of the Divine King and directly achieved the second level of the Divine King. He was invincible in the current era and reigned supreme in the galaxy. The lonely him began to search for that eternal God Emperor, hoping to have a battle with him in the realm of the Divine King. It would allow my ancestor Human King to fully unleash his combat power. However, it's a pity that the Eternal God Emperor was just as mysterious as when he first appeared. With my ancestor Human King's strength, he searched the entire universe of stars and foreign battlefield. However, he still couldn't find him. At this point, Lu Tao paused for a moment and looked at Lu Feng. Therefore, the epic Overlord Psyche Master that you mentioned is definitely the eternal God Emperor. In the recent 5,000 years, or even in this era, the only person who could possibly become the eternal God Emperor besides you is him. Lu Feng nodded slowly. He knew that a talent development quotient of 2 wasn't something that could be obtained easily. Since ancient times there had only been 2 of them. If that wasn't the case, Dao Songtian wouldn't have been so crazy. There wasn't such a coincidence in the world. In that case, the epic Overlord Psyche Master should be the eternal God Emperor. He should be the Psyche Master who wasn't any weaker than the human king when he clashed with him. Alright, Xiaofeng, you have completed everything you needed to do in the massacre abyss. What do you plan to do next? Lu Tao looked at Lu Feng. In his opinion, he hoped that Lu Feng would follow him back to his family. After all, Lu Feng could only guarantee his safety in the Lu family. As long as Lu Feng entered the pure land of bliss in the human king palace to cultivate, he would be able to rely on the Lu family's nurturing and the endless resources of divine objects. In a short time, Lu Feng would be able to become a sky celestial like Luo Yunyang and even become a virtual king. Lu Feng, who had become a virtual king, would definitely be much more abnormal than Luo Yunyang. He might even be comparable to the ancestor human king. At that time, Luo Yunyang would be able to protect himself even if he encountered a divine king in the universe. Upon seeing Lu Feng's silence, Lu Tao voiced his opinion. Of course, this was just his own opinion. He had no intention of forcing it on Lu Feng. However, after hearing Lu Tao's suggestion, Lu Feng shook his head. His gaze was incomparably resolute, and he looked at Lu Tao without the slightest hesitation. He slowly and solemnly said, "Father, I know that this path is the safest path. However, this path isn't the most suitable for me. The true essence of the cultivation technique I cultivate is to break through endless tribulations and life and death to enter a supreme domain. Besides, if I continue to cultivate in the pure land of bliss, perhaps my speed will increase a lot. However, at the same time, I will lose a lot. At that time, I will lose the baptism of killing and blood. I will lose my most powerful edge. I will lose the possibility of competing with the ancestor human king. Back then, the ancestor human king was an enemy of almost all worlds. It was also because of the pursuit of billions of races that he was able to enter the virtual king's level in such a short period of time. In the end, he became a supreme character in the universe and was invincible in the current era. If Lu Feng chose to develop steadily, he might be able to enter the domain of sky gods very quickly. However, he would have already lost the possibility of competing with the divine king. Upon hearing Lu Feng's words, Lu Tao fell silent. Yan Chenwei, who was beside him, was also silent. In their hearts, Lu Feng's safe development was the most suitable. However, they also knew that if this was really the case, then Lu Feng would probably lose the chance to compete with the primogenitor human king, the strongest expert since ancient times, just as he had said. This was absolutely unbearable for a heaven-defying genius. After a deep sigh, Lu Tao said, "Since you have already decided, then it's up to you. However, Xiaofeng, you have to remember, you are not only yourself. You are also representing me and your mother. We cannot bear the pain of losing you. Therefore, you must ensure your own safety." Lu Feng nodded fiercely. He naturally valued his parents as well. Putting himself in their shoes, he could naturally imagine the pain of losing the most precious person. "Dad, this time, I plan to go to the capital administrative planet and find my teacher, Dao Songtian, to enter the time realm. With his help, I should be able to enter the second stage of the Origin Sutra, the initial stage of the Soul Fusion realm, in a short period of time. At that time, I will be a pinnacle advanced Psyche Master." Being a pinnacle advanced psyche master is enough for me to break through layers of barriers and truly become my teacher's disciple. At that time, I will go to the Federal University's General Hospital. I think I should be able to develop faster there. In the General Hospital, there were geniuses and even monsters that appeared. In such an environment, Lu Feng would definitely be able to meet an opponent that he could fight against. At that time, relying on countless battles, his realm would definitely increase rapidly. Good. Let's do as you said. I really want to see what level your battle prowess will reach once you become an eternal god emperor. Will it really be as we have guessed? Will you really become the strongest expert who has surpassed the human king realm? In terms of martial arts, Lu Feng already had the talent to match or even surpass the human king. Becoming the primordial god emperor meant that Lu Feng would have the strength of an overlord of an era. At that time, Lu Feng would really surpass the primordial human king in all aspects. If it was someone else, they would probably not be able to cultivate to the pinnacle of psyche master and martial arts for their entire life. It would even be difficult for them to enter the divine spirit realm. After all, psyche master and martial artist are both psyche masters and martial artists. The amount of energy consumed is definitely not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. However, you are different. Xiaofeng, you have the Great Devil True Body and the Origin Sutra, these two supreme techniques. You have the primordial body and the god's origin. This also means that you can cultivate at the same time and your speed won't fall behind too much. This is your advantage, an advantage that no one can compare to. You must grasp it well. Lu Feng nodded deeply. Chapter 230. Lu Feng didn't inform anyone when he left the massacre abyss. This was because he had only really stayed in the massacre abyss for 3 days. During these 3 days, Lu Feng had spent almost all of his time in endless battles. Naturally, he didn't have any friends, not even a familiar person. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't need to inform anyone when he left. Of course, it was the same for Tu Tianxin. However, Lu Feng knew that based on how terrifying Tu Tianxin was, he probably knew all of this. And because of his promise, Tu Tianxin was the only secret that Lu Feng didn't tell his parents. After all, this was what he had promised. Being brought by Lu Tao, they were escorted by the 10 ancestors of the Lu family. Such a lineup could be called shockingly luxurious. And according to Lu Tao, he had already informed the great ancestor. As long as there was really a terrifying existence that they couldn't resist, then the terrifying ancestor of the Lu family who had collided with the Demon King would immediately wake up and rush here. Therefore, although this return to the Human Federation was full of a depressing atmosphere, the real situation was almost without danger. And the truth was indeed so. Until they entered the Federation's territory, there was still no obstructing force. When they entered the Federation's territory, the 10 ancestors of the Lu family had already left. Since they no longer had any missions, they naturally returned to the pure land of bliss to cultivate in peace. As for Lu Tao's family of 3, it didn't take long for them to return to the Cymbidium. Xiaofeng, this is the territory of our Federation. Here, there are 15 peerless divine kings' wills protecting it. Here, even the divine kings will can't detect it. If the existence of the foreign race wants to find your traces, they can only use the most primitive method, which is to send spies here to investigate one by one. Therefore, you should be safe here. The Human Federation is the place where the foreign race can't easily infiltrate. If they only relied on your face and name, it would take a while for them to find out where you were. At that time, you should have already entered the Federal University. The Federal University was the holy land of psychic. Although in the hearts of the humans of the Federation, the Federal University was only a second-tier existence among the forces of the Federation. It was the peak power under the human King Lu family and the Federation government. However, in the eyes of the other races, the Federal University was equivalent to a tiger's den. It was a terrifying place that was comparable to the two top human forces. Once Lu Feng entered the Federal University, it would be impossible to kill Lu Feng. Xiaofeng, actually, being able to enter the Federal University has many benefits for you. I won't say much about what you already know. What you should pay attention to the most is the realm of time. Realm of time. Lu Feng was also very clear about this. After all, Dao Songtian had already told him about it. The realm of time is an incomparably mysterious place. There are almost no realms of time in the entire universe. Legend has it that the realm of time has a great origin. However, no one knows what it is exactly. In the Human Federation, there are only two realms of time. One is controlled by the Federation government. Unless you join the Federation government, you can't use it at all. The second one is the Federal University's realm of time. Compared to the Federation government's realm of time, the Federal University's realm of time far surpasses the Federation government's realm of time in terms of size and speed of acceleration. Unfortunately, although the Federal University isn't as strict as the Federation government, there are still many requirements. Ordinary people can't enter. Other than the students of the Federal University, there are very few places left for the children of aristocratic families. Moreover, the time that they can stay in it is also very limited. However, you're different. Although you're a child of the Lu family, with your talent as a psychic, I'm afraid that this realm of time doesn't set any restrictions on you at all. So you must seize this opportunity. Lu Feng nodded deeply. Such an opportunity was definitely a gift from the heavens. If he didn't seize it properly, then he wouldn't be Lu Feng. Alright, Xiaofeng, since I'm here, then I won't stay. My research has reached the final stage. At this point, Lu Tao's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Lu Feng also had a lot of doubts about Lu Tao's research. After all, Lu Tao's real identity was the direct descendant of the Lu family. He was Lu Tao, the God Slayer. When he had first entered the Research Institute of the BUCC Company, it had only been because of Lu Feng. Back then, he had left the Human King's Lu family and entered the BUCC Company in order to take care of Lu Feng. In Lu Feng's previous thoughts, this should also be the case. However, Lu Feng didn't think that way anymore. Using his identity as a God Slayer to enter such an institution to work was a complete disgrace to his status. Lu Feng understood that as long as Lu Tao wanted to, the so-called Federation dollars, even if it was trillions, would be easily obtainable. However, he had still entered it, along with Yan Chenwei. There was definitely something that he didn't know about. When he saw Lu Feng's expression, Lu Tao also knew what Lu Feng was thinking. Lu Tao smiled slightly and said slowly with a strange light, Xiaofeng, this research was actually requested by me. Moreover, this research can be said to be carried out together with the BUCC company. Because once it succeeds, the one who will benefit the most will be me. Therefore, entering the BUCC company to carry out research, if you really want to calculate, it is I, Lu Tao, who owes them. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. Everything was as he had thought. I can't tell you the specifics of the research. However, before it succeeds, I can still tell you a few things. To me, this research is the most important thing apart from the two of you, because this matter is related to my path to becoming the Divine King, which was broken by the God of Hell. If it succeeds, then perhaps I can continue the Divine King's path. I will once again have the greatest possibility of becoming the Divine King. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes shone with a dazzling light. This research was actually related to his father, the Divine King Lu Tao's path to becoming the Divine King. Listening to Lu Tao's words, it seemed that his path to becoming the Divine King had been broken by the supreme ancestor of the Netherworld race, the God of Hell. If this research was successful, then perhaps Lu Tao would once again have the greatest opportunity to kill his way into the Divine King's domain. The Divine King, it could be said that it was the lifelong pursuit of every warrior. Since he was no longer in much danger, Lu Tao could indeed leave with peace of mind. Lu Feng nodded slightly. He didn't say anything. However, his mother, Yen Chunwei, said with slight dissatisfaction, "I say, Tao, in your heart, is Xiaofeng not as important as your future?" It could be said that Yen Chunwei was very careful with Lu Feng, her only child. In her heart, Lu Feng was far more important than Lu Tao's path to becoming the Divine King. Hearing this, Lu Tao smiled bitterly, but he couldn't say anything. Lu Feng said, "Mother, there is no longer any danger here. Furthermore, this research is related to Father's path to becoming the Divine King. Therefore, he should go." Yen Chunwei curled her lips slightly, but she didn't say anything. This was because she could naturally distinguish the importance of everything. In the past, whether or not Lu Tao could become the Divine King was really nothing compared to Lu Feng's safety. However, it was different now. Lu Feng's aptitude was really too terrifying and heaven-defying. As for his secret, it was enough to make the entire universe tremble in fear. Although she was about to step into the realm of the Sky God, although Lu Tao already had the strength to suppress a first-level virtual king. However, such strength couldn't protect Lu Feng at all. Now that Lu Tao had increased his strength, the most fundamental reason was to be able to better protect Lu Feng. Therefore, Yen Chunwei couldn't refute this. Okay. Mother knows. You only know how to side with your father. Mother is doing this for your own good, but you don't appreciate it. Hearing Yen Chunwei's slightly complaining voice, both Lu Feng and Lu Tao could only shrug helplessly. Although Lu Tao's family had 2 kings and was incomparably prosperous. However, the one with the most authority in the family was still Yen Chunwei. In that case, Xiaofeng, you must take good care of yourself. Before your father takes the last step, don't ever leave the protection of the Federal University and the Lu family and go to dangerous places. They were about to leave, so Yen Chunwei could only make use of this last bit of time to continuously instill the idea of safety in Lu Feng. As for Lu Feng, he could only listen helplessly. Finally, after a full 10 minutes of talking, Yen Chunwei left with Lu Tao reluctantly. Lu Feng's current location was his own home. Looking at the familiar surroundings, Lu Feng had mixed feelings. It could be said that ever since he started transforming, he had almost never returned to this home. He remembered that the last time he left was when he was heading to the Federal University. At that time, he had just returned from Gufang Planet. Compared to his current strength, it was like heaven and earth. Now, he was already standing above the realm of a martialist. His strength allowed him to contend with or even suppress a perfect stage martialist if he used all his trump cards. Such a transformation only took half a year. In this half a year, he had completed the transformation process from a Federation-level genius to the most terrifying monstrous genius. All of this really made Lu Feng feel like he was in a dream. In this half a year, I have experienced many ups and downs. My strength has changed. A lot has changed. However, the only thing that hasn't changed is my heart. My heart that will never admit defeat and will never give in. Lu Feng clenched his fists tightly and finally walked out of the house towards the center of the hover car. It was already May. There were less than 20 days left before the assessment in June. In these 20 days, he had to rush to the capital administrative planet and enter the time realm with the help of Dao Songtian. He had to undergo the most terrifying extreme time acceleration so that he could become a pinnacle advanced psychic. He bought the ticket, got in the car, and left. Everything was completed in half a day. Although it wasn't as convenient as driving himself, Lu Feng could still accept this speed. When he got out of the car, the hover car of the Federal University was already parked quietly in the center of the hover car. When Lu Feng left, he had already informed Li Tianlai. After receiving Lu Feng's message, Li Tianlai naturally used the hover car of the Federal University to pick up Lu Feng. Looking at the teacher who walked out of the Federal University, Lu Feng smiled and nodded. However, he no longer had the slightly humble expression he used to have. Although he didn't discriminate against these people based on their level, deep in his heart, Lu Feng was no longer the Lu Feng of the past. This experience in the massacre abyss allowed Lu Feng to face the supreme geniuses of billions of races. In the end, he suppressed them all single-handedly and shook the galaxy. Although he didn't accept the challenge of the King of Massacre, many existences had already regarded Lu Feng as the true King of Massacre. In fact, he was the pinnacle of the King of Massacre. At the last moment, he broke through and became a martialist. In the real massacre abyss, Lu Feng once again completed a shocking transformation. The enhancement of his physical body, the engraving of the mystery of life and death in his body, and his level reaching the pinnacle, all of this allowed him to have the strength to match or even suppress a mid-level perfect stage martialist in just a short period of time. This kind of terrifying strength was absolutely shocking. One had to know that a perfect stage martialist was considered a noble and terrifying existence even on a life-sustaining planet. However, he wasn't even 18 years old yet. Chapter 231. Lu Feng was now equivalent to a perfect stage warrior. Even those powerful families, the supreme geniuses of the Divine King clan, needed to reach this level of strength at the age of 23 or 24. However, Lu Feng had already reached this level 6 or 7 years earlier. Such a young and unparalleled success, coupled with the transformation of his soul and the awakening of nobility, gave Lu Feng an innate aristocratic aura that overlooked billions of creatures. At this moment, even a real god would not be able to produce any sense of superiority when facing him. Now, the teacher who came to pick up Lu Feng also had the same feeling. He was a teacher, and he was even a martial artist. In a third-grade life planet, he was definitely an existence that was indescribably noble. However, at this moment, when facing Lu Feng, he felt a kind of oppression deep in his heart. Even when facing the demigod existence of the principal, Li Tianlai, he did not have this kind of feeling. It was also because of this feeling that after seeing Lu Feng's incomparably calm attitude, the teacher was unusually respectful. "You must be Lu Feng. I was appointed by the principal to pick you up. Now get in the car." After saying this, he walked directly to the back door and personally opened the car door for Lu Feng. In the face of all this, Lu Feng still had a calm and noble smile. After saying thank you, Lu Feng directly boarded the hover car. Everything was so calm that it could even be said to be natural. The two people involved did not feel anything else. However, the chauffeur revealed a shocked expression. He was the teacher's personal hover car driver. It could be said that the driver understood his boss's teacher very well. After all, after 3 or 4 years of getting along, he could see a person's nature even if they were hiding it. In his impression, although this teacher looked modest, he was incomparably arrogant deep in his heart. After all, on such a third-grade life planet, with the strength of a warrior, this kind of arrogance was nothing much. Although he did not usually treat his students with indifference, he would never do such an action. Now, this teacher's actions simply overturned the driver's understanding. However, during the half-hour driving the hover car to the Federal University, the driver's shock continued to increase. Actually, it was nothing much. It was just the attitude of the two people involved that shocked him too much. When they first entered the hover car, the teacher had found all kinds of excuses to talk to Lu Feng. However, Lu Feng was always very calm. Every time he answered, he directly blocked the teacher's way, making him unable to continue. It could be said that Lu Feng's actions were a little rude. However, when faced with this kind of Lu Feng, the teacher had always been cautious. He did not care about Lu Feng's attitude. When Lu Feng said that he wanted to take a break, the teacher, even his breathing, was extremely careful. This scene really shocked the driver. Finally, after the longest half-hour in history, the three of them arrived in front of the main teaching building of the Federal University. Looking at Lu Feng, who was slightly asleep, the teacher hesitated for a moment before finally waking Lu Feng up. "Lu Feng, we're here." When he heard this, Lu Feng's eyes instantly opened. Actually, he wasn't really tired. It was just that he didn't like this teacher's way of finding things to talk about. Everything happened too quickly. Lu Feng also wanted to calm down and think about his future path, so he said those words. Once they arrived at the destination, Lu Feng directly woke up when the teacher spoke. Lu Feng looked at the teacher with a smile and said politely, "Then I'll have to trouble you, teacher. Thank you for the journey." When the teacher heard Lu Feng's words, he actually showed a look of fear and trepidation. He quickly said, "It's no trouble, you're welcome. Student Lu Feng, have a safe trip." While speaking, Lu Feng had already walked out of the car. He waved at the teacher one last time, and Lu Feng walked directly to the main teaching building. This was the main teaching building of the Federal University. Including this time, this was already the third time Lu Feng had come here. Therefore, there was nothing unfamiliar about this place. He directly walked up the stairs and headed to the top floor. 10 minutes later, Lu Feng appeared in front of Li Tianlai's office. He slightly adjusted his mentality. For Li Tianlai, this senior, Lu Feng could be said to be quite respectful and close to him. Lu Feng already knew a little about Li Tianlai's matters. This senior was once a student of the Federal University's General Hospital. Although he was a super genius of the Federation level, but in that era where exceptional geniuses were born in large numbers, this kind of aptitude was not considered to be the best. However, Li Tianlai was a person with great luck. In the outer region battlefield, Li Tianlai, whose strength was considered to be very ordinary, unexpectedly obtained the inheritance of a powerhouse. And that powerhouse was a solitary powerhouse who did not belong to any race. Although his profession was not a psychic, he was in existence similar to one. The great emperor of Dongru. That's an existence at the level of a void emperor, equivalent to an ancient existence at the 5th degree of the virtual king. Senior Tianlai himself is the most orthodox psychic. With the inheritance of the great emperor of Dongru, with the help of teacher and the resources of the Federal University, I'm afraid that in the future, he will most likely enter the level of a void emperor. Once Li Tianlai became a void emperor powerhouse, then Li Tianlai would be able to become a true overlord existence. After all, the 5th degree of the virtual king was already the strongest foundation of the major races. It was the combat power of those sleeping ancestors. After arranging everything, Lu Feng knocked on the door. When he heard the voice asking him to come in, he directly pushed the door open and walked in. Looking at Li Tianlai, who was smiling at him, Lu Feng also revealed a friendly smile. "Senior." Hearing Lu Feng's greeting, Li Tianlai did not answer. Instead, he quietly looked at Lu Feng. However, the more he observed, the more shocked he became. Just as Lu Feng knew, Li Tianlai had obtained the inheritance of the Void Emperor powerhouse of the East Ru land. He had also entered the 2nd degree of the demigod realm. Although he was only at the 2nd degree of the demigod realm, his knowledge and judgment were definitely not comparable to any ordinary demigod due to the help of the inheritance. Naturally, he could see that Lu Feng was extraordinary. After a while, Li Tianlai's smile gradually disappeared. He let out a deep sigh and said, "Junior brother, it seems that the benefits you gain from this trial aren't just a little bit." Li Tianlai could naturally see Lu Feng's level. He could already see that Lu Feng had become a martialist and was even at the pinnacle of the martialist realm. Furthermore, he could sense a terrifying power from Lu Feng's body. This was definitely not something that a martialist at the pinnacle of the evolution stage could possess. When facing Lu Feng, even he, who was at the demigod realm, felt a slight sense of suppression and danger. Naturally, Li Tianlai also knew that Lu Feng would be extremely terrifying in the future. However, the current Lu Feng would definitely not be a threat to him. However, this kind of threatening feeling still made him feel shocked. After all, Lu Feng was only 18 years old now. After hearing Li Tianlai's words, Lu Feng smiled faintly but did not explain further. This time, he had indeed obtained a terrifying increase in strength. Compared to before he had left, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. Back when he had separated from Li Tianlai and received the special training of the massacre god, Lu Feng had only been a beginner high-level warrior. He was only equivalent to a mid-level or high-level martialist at the evolution stage. However, now, his combat strength had increased by 2 whole levels. Furthermore, not even half a year had passed. "Senior brother, you should already know why I've come to find you this time, right?" Li Tianlai nodded gently. Naturally, he knew that Lu Feng had come to find him this time because he wanted to return to the Federal University General Hospital as soon as possible to accept Dao Songtian's help and enter the realm of time to cultivate. He hoped that he could become an advanced psychic before the assessment. "Junior brother, it seems that teacher is determined to accept you as his last disciple. You should know that the realm of time is not something that can be entered casually. Even I, after receiving the inheritance of the Dongru Great Emperor, needed a certain amount of time to apply before I could enter. However, you can enter whenever you want to. The difference between us is obvious at a glance." Hearing the jealousy in Li Tianlai's words, Lu Feng only shrugged his shoulders gently. He didn't explain anything and just smiled on the spot. Seeing Lu Feng's invulnerable appearance, Li Tianlai didn't have any good ideas. He said, "Junior brother, before you came, I had already informed teacher. However, teacher seems to have entered the realm of time to cultivate. We can't contact him in a short period of time. However, I believe that in a few days, teacher should be able to receive the news. When that time comes, let's go." Lu Feng nodded gently. If he were to go to the capital administrative planet by himself, he might not be able to make it in time to leave now. Even if he were to take Li Tianlai's spaceship, it would be impossible. After all, the realm of time only accelerated, but it didn't completely stop time. Lu Feng estimated that he could cultivate for at least 10 days in the realm of time. There were only about 20 days left until the assessment. Even if he took Li Tianlai's personal spaceship, he might not be able to make it back in time for the assessment. Therefore, he had to wait for Dao Songtian to come out of seclusion. With Dao Songtian's cultivation as a peak heavenly master, it would be easy for him to open a space-time crack to bring Lu Feng over. In that case, he could also save a lot of time. Lu Feng nodded gently and said, "Then I will listen to senior brother. I have nothing else to do now, so I will take my leave first. When there is news from teacher, senior brother, you can inform me." Li Tianlai nodded gently. Although he didn't know why Dao Songtian entered the realm of time. But according to what Dao Songtian said before he left, it seemed to be a very important matter. In this case, it wouldn't be easy for him to contact Dao Songtian. "Then junior brother, do as you wish. At most 2 days, at least today, I should be able to wait for teacher's news. When the time comes, I will inform you directly." Lu Feng nodded his head gently. Finally, he chatted with Dao Songtian for a while before leaving. After leaving Dao Songtian's office, Lu Feng's first choice wasn't the dormitory, but the technique pavilion. Because he didn't inform Tu Tianxin before he left. Although Lu Feng also knew how terrifying Tu Tianxin was and thought that he would always pay attention to him, he didn't inform him. If Dao Songtian was his teacher, then Tu Tianxin was the real teacher in Lu Feng's heart. In the 2 months, Tu Tianxian could be said to have accompanied him all the time, using his experience to help Lu Feng improve. Chapter 232. Lu Feng had been able to sense a lot ever since he had become a person who had entered the Tao. Lu Feng did not know if Tu Tianxian had any other intentions towards Lu Feng, as they were both Tao seekers. However, he could sense that the mysterious Tu Tianxian didn't have any ill intentions towards him. There was no need for anything else, just this point alone was enough. Therefore, after leaving Li Tianlai's office, the first place Lu Feng went to was the Cultivation Technique Pavilion. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Many people were in class at this time. Naturally, there were fewer students going to the Cultivation Technique Pavilion to borrow cultivation technique. At the very least, when Lu Feng had entered, there hadn't been many. The moment he walked into the Cultivation Technique Pavilion, he felt as if the world had changed again. Lu Feng had already confirmed that Tu Tianxian had indeed returned. Lu Feng smiled happily as he looked at the hazy and mysterious figure in front of him. "Senior, you've really returned." Lu Feng's voice also carried a hint of happiness. Tu Tianxian seemed to have sensed Lu Feng's tone. Although his voice was as calm as ever, Lu Feng could clearly sense the happiness contained in it. "Lu Feng, you're not bad. You're really not bad. When you came here to train, I already thought that you were pretty good. However, I didn't expect that you would be able to break through and give me an even bigger surprise." When Lu Feng had come here to train with Tu Tianxian, his strength hadn't changed much. However, he had already entered the Tao at a young age. Entering the Tao at a young age was such a terrifying title. Since ancient times, those who had been able to enter the Tao had all been peerless and terrifying almighties. They had all been supreme existences like the ancient sages. Lu Feng had only met a few people who had entered the Tao at the moment. In the sacred land of the Lu clan, the Lu clan's pure land of bliss, the grand ancestor of the Lu clan and several other ancient progenitors had already reached the Tao. Lu Feng was now certain of this. Other than them, there was only his teacher, Dao Songtian, and Tu Tianxian. Until now, Lu Feng could clearly feel it. Even his father, God-slaying Lu Tao, who was said to be the most talented person in the universe in the past 500 years, had not stepped into the Tao. He was merely hovering on the brink of stepping into the Tao. But Lu Feng had already done it. Putting aside his aptitude, just his comprehension ability alone was enough to make him stand out from the rest of the world. Lu Feng only smiled shyly at Tu Tianxian's praise. He was worthy of such praise, but he was incomparably shy. In front of Tu Tianxian, Lu Feng felt a sense of belonging to a junior. Hence, he didn't have that crazy stubbornness and heaven-defying arrogance in front of outsiders. "Lu Feng, I have already seen the battle in the massacre abyss. However, I still want to ask you one last question." Hearing this, Lu Feng's expression became solemn. He knew that what Tu Tianxian was going to ask must be a very important question, and it was very likely that it was the true secret of the massacre abyss. However, Lu Feng did not intend to hide this secret from Tu Tianxian. Although he did not know the details of Tu Tianxian, Lu Feng chose to believe in him. Moreover, he didn't really know the final shocking secret. However, when Tu Tianxian asked the question, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. "Lu Feng, tell me the truth. When you were at the peak of the extreme peak and fought against the 5 emperors alone, was that your full strength? Then, is that your peak state?" Lu Feng pondered for a moment, as if he had thought of many things. Finally, he raised his head and looked at Tu Tianxian solemnly. He said slowly, "Senior, at that time, I was indeed not at my peak strength. If I had used my full strength, the outcome would not have been a draw. And I could have suppressed the 5 emperors of massacre. Using his full strength meant that Lu Feng's final trump card, that strange power, was also going to be used. At that time, His strength was a level higher than when he fought against the 5 emperors. Yes, a level higher. As long as he used all his trump cards, his strength would definitely be able to suppress the 5 emperors. However, at the same time, he would also be injured to a certain extent. After all, the 5 emperors at that time had all taken elixirs to forcibly raise their strength to a whole new level. Even at the last moment, they had used their most powerful killing techniques, which were all supreme techniques. Therefore, Lu Feng could suppress them, but he could not do so easily. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Tu Tianxin fell silent. This silence lasted for a long time. Finally, after a long wait, a voice broke the silence. That was laughter. That was incomparably crazy laughter. Good. 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 Very good, very good, very good. Lu Feng, you are indeed someone I value highly. You are indeed a peerless king who surpasses the human monarch in my heart. Lu Feng was silent, but his eyes shone with a trembling light. Surpassing the human monarch. In Tu Tianxin's eyes, he was actually an existence that could surpass the human monarch. What a great honor this was! Even though Lu Feng had said those words, even though Lu Feng had shown such crazy potential, no one was willing to believe that they could surpass the human monarch. Tu Tianxin was the only existence other than his own parents who believed that he had the potential to surpass the human monarch. Furthermore, Tu Tianxin was an incomparably terrifying existence. He was an extreme expert. His acknowledgement was better than the acknowledgement of billions of ordinary creatures. However, Lu Feng did not say anything else, because this was indeed what he thought. He had 2 great goals and 2 great ideals in this life. One of them was to surpass his own ancestor, to surpass the human monarch. After a long time, the laughter gradually stopped. At this time, Tu Tianxin walked in front of Lu Feng. He looked at Lu Feng quietly. After a long time, he finally opened his mouth to speak. Previously, the combat power you showed was already at the pinnacle of the King of Massacre. Such terrifying potential is not inferior to your father's at all. And your father is known as the most talented person in 500 years. Even in the recent few thousand years, there is almost no one who can surpass him. And you have already surpassed your father. Since ancient times, there are still a few who can truly be on par with your father in terms of combat power. However, those existences have already been titled as the true supreme of the universe. And to be able to surpass your father, there is only one. That is the human monarch. The aptitude and combat power of the human monarch need not be mentioned. Lu Feng had personally experienced it. Back then, in front of the heavenly door, when he collided with the traces left behind by the human monarch, Lu Feng already knew how terrifying the human monarch was. That was a supreme existence whose combat power could surpass the 4th level of the demigod realm in the realm of the perfect stage. Just a casual attack could wipe out a god. Lu Feng could imagine that the human monarch at the pinnacle of the perfect stage would be able to wipe out a true god in the realm of the perfect stage when he unleashed all his combat power. This was really an incredible combat power. In this era, even the Holy Emperor, who was at the pinnacle of the Emperor of Massacre, was unable to wipe out a god in the realm of the perfect stage. Using all means such as supreme techniques, he might be able to fight against a demigod in the 3rd or 4th level of the perfect stage. However, if he were to encounter a god, he would be wiped out in an instant. However, the human monarch can do it. He is actually able to wipe out a god in the same realm, and it is highly possible that he is an existence who can wipe out a true god. This kind of combat power can no longer be described as heaven-defying. Lu Feng took a deep breath. However, in the next moment, a vigorous fighting spirit appeared in his eyes. It was a kind of supreme fighting spirit that was fearless and unflinching in the face of anything. However, I am not bad either. Right now, I am only at the pinnacle of the evolution stage. However, even if I were to encounter a mid-level perfect stage warrior, once I cultivate to the limit, I would be able to wipe him out. Moreover, as my level increases, my bloodline will also awaken further. My great demon power will also become more terrifying. My great demon blessing will also become the strongest. At that time, relying on the strange power after the increase, at the pinnacle of the perfect stage, I will also have the ability to wipe out a god, fight against a true god, and even suppress one. Compared to my ancestor, the human monarch, I, Lu Feng, am not bad. Lu Feng's heart was incomparably firm. 9 lives of illusion, entering the path at a young age, and hundreds of millions of life and death tests had allowed him to reach a level that was far beyond any other young existence of the same realm. Even when facing the Divine King when he was young, he also had the ability to suppress. Lu Feng, you're going to say goodbye to me this time, right? Lu Feng nodded gently. As long as he could pass the assessment, he would be able to enter the Federal University's headquarters. At that time, he would head to the capital administrative planet to cultivate. At that time, he was afraid that he would not be able to receive Tu Tianxin's knowledge and help like before. Yes, Senior, but I will find time to come back and continue to receive your teachings. Lu Feng absolutely could not give up the opportunity to be personally taught by an extreme expert like Tu Tianxin. He would also try his best to come back and receive Tu Tianxin's teachings. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Tu Tianxin knew that Lu Feng had already made up his mind. Once such an existence who entered the path at such a young age was determined, even life and death could not change it. After pondering for a moment, Tu Tianxin opened his mouth again and said, "You don't have to come back." Hearing this, Lu Feng's eyes narrowed slightly. However, just as he was slightly flustered, Tu Tianxin's voice rang out again. "This time, I will go with you to the capital administrative planet." Chapter 233. What appeared in Lu Feng's eyes was a touched expression. He knew that Tu Tianxin was willing to go to the capital administrative planet for his sake. Otherwise, why would he leave at this time? Some things are too far in the past. It's time to face them. I will hide in the endless nothingness. No one will be able to find me. When the time comes, I will continue to teach you. Alright, you can leave first. When you set off, I will follow you to the capital administrative planet. After he said this, he waved his hands gently and sent Lu Feng back to the present world without waiting for Lu Feng to say anything. Lu Feng let out a long sigh as he stood in the cultivation technique pavilion. Lu Feng vaguely understood something about Tu Tianxin's behavior at the last moment. He knew that going to the capital administrative planet would make things very difficult for Tu Tianxin. However, for his own sake, Tu Tianxin had decided to go. Senior, please rest assured that I, Lu Feng, will definitely be able to reach the heights that you expect me to. I will definitely be able to accomplish everything that you wish for. As he came out of the cultivation technique pavilion, Lu Feng opened the Sky Network and started to check today's classes. After a quick scan, a smile appeared on Lu Feng's face. He had already checked. There were indeed classes in the afternoon, but they weren't specialized in telekinesis. The same was true for the warrior department. Lu Feng was sure that Su Wenchao should still be busy with his own matters in the dormitory. As for Qi Yunqing, he should be cultivating quietly in a quiet place. Just nice, I can say goodbye to them. I shouldn't be able to stay for too long after coming back this time. Su Wenchao and Qi Yunqing's talents weren't bad. They were practically nebula-level geniuses. All of this meant that there was hope for them to obtain a specially recruited quota. However, this hope wasn't very certain. At the moment, there were only 10 specially recruited quotas. 5 for the telekinesis department and 5 for the warrior department. Lu Feng had heard that 3 people from the warrior department had already become martialists, so these 3 people must belong to the specially recruited quota. In addition to these 3 people, there should be a few who were at the peak of the advanced warrior realm. What Qi Yunqing wanted to do was to compete with these geniuses for the final 2 spots. His hope was there, but it was dangerous. On the other hand, Su Wenchao's psychic faculty was different. Although the competition for the psychic faculty was fierce, it was much worse than the warrior faculty. Lu Feng had personally studied in the psychic department before. Furthermore, Lu Feng was certain that none of them would be able to break through and become a great psyche master before the assessment. After all, it was much more difficult for a psychic to break through than a warrior. Therefore, psychics and warriors of the same age and aptitude would usually have a huge difference in level. This was the current situation. Mu Shuiyan should be able to get a special place in the psychic department. Although she was only a collateral descendant of the Mu clan in the Skycloud galaxy, she was still a member of the Mu clan. But in terms of talent, it was also incomparably terrifying. Moreover, her level was one of the best in the entire psychic faculty. As for Su Wenchao, Lu Feng was certain of one thing. That was, his talent was even more powerful and terrifying than Mu Shuiyan's. However, this roommate of his seemed to be very lazy and not very enthusiastic about the cultivation of a psychic. Otherwise, he might really become the only great psyche master before this assessment. I hope I can meet them again in the General Institute. Shaking his head with a smile, Lu Feng walked directly to his dormitory. Along the way, Lu Feng walked with his head down. In the Cymbidium branch, he only stayed for a few days. Therefore, he didn't know most of the students here. Naturally, these people didn't know him either. Soon, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of the dormitory building. In front of his dormitory, Lu Feng took out the key and directly opened the door. At this time, a lazy voice came from the room. "Oh, what a miracle! Little Cheng, why didn't you practice until midnight today? You actually came back so early. This is really a once-in-a-lifetime event." This was Su Wenchao's voice. Hearing this, Lu Feng showed a trace of a smile that came from the bottom of his heart. Little Cheng should still be immersed in his cultivation. But you, Little Cheng, why are you so lazy? Don't you care about this assessment at all? Hearing Lu Feng's voice, the room was silent. After a long time, Lu Feng heard a cry of surprise. However, this voice made Lu Feng speechless. "Little Cheng, come back quickly. The big nouveau riche is here. We'll be back soon. Tonight, we'll have another free meal." Lu Feng took a deep breath, hoping that he wouldn't be angered by this unscrupulous roommate. After a while, the familiar sound of table knocking and chair knocking was heard in the room again. Lu Feng knew that this was exclusive to Su Wenchao. Other than him, no one else would behave like this. After a few seconds, a familiar figure finally appeared at the door. Looking at Su Wenchao, Lu Feng showed a happy smile. However, in the next moment, his smile suddenly stiffened. "Big nouveau riche, you are finally back. You don't know how we have been these days. In order to let me practice in peace, my family seriously limited my source of income. I haven't eaten a full meal for many days." As he spoke, he rushed directly to Lu Feng's side and hugged Lu Feng. As if he felt Lu Feng's slightly stiff body in his arms, Su Wenchao pretended to cry a few times and touched Lu Feng's body again and again. Feeling these movements, Lu Feng was completely stiff. After taking a few deep breaths and trying to calm his mood that was about to explode, Lu Feng grabbed Su Wenchao. Su Wenchao was a psychic, so his body was very weak. Lu Feng was now a martial artist. Under Lu Feng's strength, Su Wenchao had no chance of resisting at all. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws in midair, but when he realized that it was all in vain, his wretched eyes turned and showed that sad expression again. "Xiaofeng, I missed you so much." Looking at Su Wenchao, who was pretending to be pitiful in midair, Lu Feng sneered. "Did you miss me or my money?" Hearing this, Su Wenchao showed an affectionate expression again. Of course it's you. We are senior brothers. How can I not miss you? Lu Feng continued to sneer and said, if that's the case, then shouldn't you treat me to a good meal as an appetizer? For a moment, Lu Feng saw Su Wenchao's body stiffen slightly. However, in the next moment, those wretched eyes turned again. Talking about money between brothers will hurt our feelings. Xiaofeng, you don't know how difficult my life has been recently. Seeing that Lu Feng was still unmoved, Su Wenchao began to talk about his miserable life. It turned out that the Su family also knew what kind of person Su Wenchao was. Although he was the young master of the Su family, the fact that Su Wenchao didn't like to cultivate was known to the entire Su family. The Su family attached great importance to this special enrollment assessment. In order to let Su Wenchao successfully break through, the Su family had set a condition for him. The Su family set a condition for Su Wenchao. If Su Wenchao couldn't pass the assessment, then his living expenses in the future would be infinitely reduced. This time, in order to let him cultivate in peace, Su Wenchao's living expenses had been reduced a lot since he entered the school. In this way, the possibility of Su Wenchao spending money to fool around was eliminated. But what kind of person was Su Wenchao? He was the kind of person who liked to play more than anything else. Naturally, the living expenses he received every month were all spent in a short time. If it hadn't been for Qi Yunqing's help, he would have starved to death. However, Qi Yunqing's living expenses weren't that much. After helping him, Qi Yunqing naturally didn't have any good days. Therefore, during this period of time every month, the two of them were extremely difficult. Therefore, when he saw Lu Feng, Su Wenchao shouted that he hadn't eaten enough for a few days. This wasn't a lie at all. Finally, after Su Wenchao finished speaking, Qi Yunqing also came back. Although Qi Yunqing wasn't a good person occasionally, it was obvious that he hadn't reached Su Wenchao's level. When he saw Lu Feng, Qi Yunqing revealed more of his emotions when he saw a brother. Now that everyone was here, Lu Feng had no choice but to treat the two of them to a good meal in consideration of their miserable state. Xiaofeng, you came at the wrong time. If you had come 2 months earlier or more than 10 days later, you would still have been able to see Mu Shuyan. However, now is really not the time. Su Wenchao, who was eating happily at the dining table, looked at Lu Feng and said this. If these words had come out of someone else's mouth, it would have been a pity. However, when it came out of Su Wenchao's mouth, coupled with his wretched eyes, it made people feel that this matter was very dirty. Lu Feng didn't care that Mu Shuyan wasn't there. Although he had gone through life and death with Mu Shuyan, Lu Feng had faced a venerated martialist when he had been a mid-level warrior for her sake. However, deep in his heart, he only had a good impression of Mu Shuyan. Moreover, every time he thought of Mu Shuyan, a figure would always appear in Lu Feng's mind. It was an extremely hazy figure. No matter how much Lu Feng thought about it, he couldn't see it clearly. It was precisely because of the existence of that figure that Lu Feng hadn't thought much about Mu Shuyan. Today, when he heard Su Wenchao say this, Lu Feng thought of Mu Shuyan. What's the matter? Did something happen to her? When he heard Lu Feng's question, the wretched look on Su Wenchao's face became even more intense. Lu Feng was already used to this kind of expression. He still wanted to say something, but Qi Yunqing, who was next to him, had already told him everything. It turned out that in order to let Mu Shuyan pass the assessment smoothly, the Mu family of Tianyun had called her back to receive special training. This time, it was the main family that had called her back. Therefore, no matter how much she didn't want to, Mu Shuyan had still gone back. According to the schedule, Mu Shuyan would return in about 10 days to prepare for the assessment. Therefore, Lu Fenglai's timing wasn't right. Chapter 234. After listening to this explanation, Lu Feng nodded lightly and shrugged indifferently. If it's not the right time, then it's not the right time. Anyway, I'm going to leave in a few days. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Su Wenchao and Qi Yunqing were both slightly stunned. This time, they were all sitting upright. Su Wenchao's tone also became solemn. Qi Yunqing, who was next to him, spoke first. Xiaofeng, are you going to leave? You should know that there are still 20 days left until the assessment. Are you going to give up on the assessment? Brother, you don't have to hide it from us. Your strength shouldn't be that simple. I don't dare to say anything about psychics, but as a warrior, I can be sure that you have terrifying strength as a warrior. You might even be as strong as me. If that's the case, you definitely have the possibility to take the assessment and try for the specially recruited spot. But why do you want to give up? Qi Yunqing was even a little excited when he spoke of his origins. As someone from a big family, this kind of brotherly relationship was very important. He cherished it even more. In his hope, he wanted Su Wenchao and Lu Feng to enter the Federal University General Hospital together. Although Su Wenchao was very lazy, in Qi Yunqing's heart, Su Wenchao should be the easiest to pass the assessment. The only problem was Lu Feng. However, Qi Yunqing believed in his intuition. He understood that if Lu Feng was willing to try for the 5 specially recruited spots, then there was still some possibility. But now that he heard Lu Feng say this, it seemed that he had the intention to give up. He really couldn't accept it. Seeing the expressions of these two people and feeling their excitement, Lu Feng's heart was also burning. He pondered for a moment and finally decided to tell them everything. The current him had already seen through many things. For Lu Fenglai, his identity was no longer a burden. He already had enough strength and could face many things by himself. Actually, this time I'm not leaving to give up on the assessment, but to pass the assessment. This time, I'm going to my teacher to receive training. Hearing this, the two of them were slightly stunned. Both of them already knew about Lu Feng's family. However, what they knew came from Lu Feng's mouth. In their hearts, Lu Feng should be considered a wealthy family. After all, their parents were the higher-ups of BUCC, so it was natural for them to be rich. But apart from this, they had never heard Lu Feng mention that he had a teacher. Teacher? Xiaofeng's son, you have a teacher? Who is your teacher? Lu Feng was silent for a moment. Just when the two thought that Lu Feng wasn't going to say anything, Lu Feng slowly spat out 3 words that shocked the two of them. My teacher is Dao Songtian. The two of them were slightly stunned. Dao Songtian? When they heard this name, they were slightly puzzled. Moreover, there was a sense of familiarity. But soon, Su Wenchao thought of something. His face was slightly distorted, and he was trembling slightly. His eyes suddenly widened as he looked at Lu Feng. His expression was full of excitement and trembling. Seeing Su Wenchao's expression, Qi Yunqing also seemed to have thought of something. A moment later, this wretched person who had always been simple and honest actually had the same expression on his face. You said that your teacher is Dao Songtian? Is it that Dao Songtian? They didn't say his identity because both of them hoped that Lu Feng would say it himself. In the Federation there were countless people, and there were countless people with the same name. However, there was only one person who could be called Dao Songtian. He was the #1 psychic in the world, the leader of the Federal University, this terrifying force. With such an identity, even the current president of the Federation government would have to respectfully salute him and call him teacher. Could it be that he was Lu Feng's teacher? But how was that possible? Even the ancestors of their clans would not dare to show any disrespect to someone of that status. Looking at the shocked expressions of the two people, Lu Feng had already guessed it. Dao Songtian's identity was really terrifying. He was the #1 psychic in the world, with hundreds of disciples and a terrifying force. The Federal University behind him was one of the top 3 super forces in the Federation. Even in the entire universe, it was a terrifying force with an illustrious reputation. If he wasn't a direct descendant of the Lu family, if he hadn't experienced so much, then, at this moment, when he heard Dao Songtian's name, Lu Feng would also be incomparably shocked. He smiled and nodded his head gently. At this moment, Qi Yunqing and Su Wenchao both sucked in countless breaths of cold air. When they looked at Lu Feng, their eyes were filled with deep shock. Indeed, this was really too shocking. They had originally been disciples of aristocratic families. They had even been disciples of second-rate aristocratic families. Aristocratic families were existences that could be considered divine descendant. Their status was incomparably noble. Even if they were placed on a Grade 1 life-preserving planet, they would still be considered the most noble existence. However, compared to being Dao Songtian's disciple, their status was far too inferior. Even though Dao Songtian had a few hundred disciples, every single one of them was a truly terrifying expert. Moreover, many of them were even patriarchs and patriarchs of first-rate clans and clans. Lu Feng had become Dao Songtian's disciple. In terms of status, he already had the same qualifications as the ancestors and family heads of first-rate aristocratic families. Such a status was indescribably noble, simply indescribably noble. After the boundless shock, there was an endless silence. Lu Feng didn't disturb the two of them. He just ate quietly. Lu Feng knew that if they couldn't overcome the hurdle in their hearts, then whatever he said would be useless. After a long time, Su Wenchao was the first to react. He heaved a long sigh of relief. Although his eyes were still filled with shock, his expression had already gradually calmed down. Qi Yunqing followed suit. The two of them heaved a long sigh of relief. Lu Feng, I really didn't know that you had hidden your background so deeply. I didn't expect you to have such a background. Being Dao Songtian's disciple, this kind of status is definitely considered extremely noble in the entire Federation. If you can become his last disciple, then perhaps you will truly become a prince of the entire human race. Dao Songtian had hundreds of disciples, but only a few were his last disciples. The status of these people was equivalent to the direct descendants of the 8 great aristocratic families, or even higher. After all, among the 8 great aristocratic families, besides the Lu family, which didn't have many descendants, the other 7 great aristocratic families had at least 100 direct descendants. Even the smallest ones had more than 20 direct descendants. When he heard Su Wenchao's words, Lu Feng smiled noncommittally. He didn't tell these two that, as long as he passed the assessment, he would become Dao Songtian's last disciple. After all, although he had absolute confidence in himself, he hadn't realized it yet. Lu Feng's character was just like that. If he wasn't sure, he wouldn't say it. By the way, Xiaofeng, what are you hiding from us? Su Wenchao, who seemed to have reacted, suddenly rushed over to Lu Feng and grabbed Lu Feng's collar with one hand. If anyone else had treated him this way, Lu Feng would definitely have let them know the wrath of this new supreme ruler. However, this person was his brother. When he saw this, Lu Feng didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled happily. Based on the way Su Wenchao addressed him, Lu Feng knew that Su Wenchao hadn't alienated him because of his status. Lu Feng hesitated for a moment when he saw Qi Yunqing's ferocious expression. In the end, he slowly smiled. He had already decided to tell her everything. He would tell her everything about his identity without holding anything back. Although he was only a martialist at the peak of the evolution stage and wasn't even 18 years old, his strength was already extremely frightening. This kind of strength was already not inferior to that of a first-rate family or even a superfamily. It was the direct descendant of the younger generation who had truly matured. Although he still couldn't compare to the 7 great rulers of the Federation, Lu Feng believed that he wasn't far from them. If he still wanted to improve rapidly during his trip to the capital administrative planet, he would definitely cause a huge commotion. When that happened, his identity wouldn't be a secret anymore. Furthermore, Lu Feng's actions in the massacre abyss had already caused a huge commotion in the entire galaxy. Lu Feng also knew that the geniuses of the Federation would more or less fight with the geniuses of other races when they reached adulthood. Based on the commotion he had caused, it wouldn't be long before his identity would be spread back to the Federation and everyone would know about it. When the two of them found out about his identity, there would definitely be a lot of complaints. It might even cause a rift between them. Lu Feng really didn't want this to happen, so he was willing to come clean. When they saw Lu Feng's appearance, the two of them froze and glanced at each other. When they had said this before, they had all been joking. However, when they saw Lu Feng's appearance, they understood. Lu Feng might really have an even more terrifying identity. Don't tell us something even more terrifying. Since he had already decided everything, Lu Feng naturally would not put on an act anymore. He nodded slightly. Looking at the anxious eyes of the two, Lu Feng slowly said, "Actually, it's not a big secret. I just didn't tell you my specific identity." Specific identity? Aren't you a member of the Cymbidium? Aren't your parents the higher-ups of BUCC? What's wrong with that? Are you going to tell me that your father is a member of Buck's board of directors? Or are you directly the descendant of Buck's founder? These words were purely a joke, because when they saw Lu Feng's appearance, the two of them knew that this was absolutely impossible. After all, Lu Feng's appearance was similar to that of the pure Easterners in the Earth era. The founder of BUCC looked similar to a Westerner. When Lu Feng heard their teasing words, he smiled helplessly and continued, "Actually, I don't know. My parents are indeed the higher-ups of BUCC. However, they only entered there for some personal matters. They also have their own family." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.